I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 576 Seal. The top of the pipe went straight into Li Ming's abdomen, and the glowing body fell along the pipe like a fireball burning through, and finally entered Li Ming's abdomen little by little. Nicole and Fidelia both opened their eyes wide and watched, and their expressions seemed extremely nervous and excited. At this time, Li Ming only felt an object entering his abdomen. Because Li Ming's energy was suppressed, Li Ming was powerless to resist, no matter what object entered his body. But there was a slight sound in his head, and the whole body suddenly lit up. A strange energy instantly filled Li Ming's whole body. The overly powerful Li Ming instantly made Li Ming's body lose control. The body was completely paralyzed, and an external consciousness entered Li Ming's consciousness at once, and the two consciousnesses in the brain collided violently. But the appearance of the body did not change at all. Li Ming lay on the ground motionless like a corpse. Nicole stood on the round platform high up and looked at Li Ming, whispering, "Start the next step." As he spoke, the needle tip inserted into Li Ming's abdomen was slowly pulled out and then raised up and retracted little by little. The chains that had been wrapped around Li Ming's body also shrank and moved away from his body. Then the platform began to descend little by little, sinking downwards. Li Ming's body became increasingly blurred in the darkness and finally disappeared in the darkness with the platform, as if immersed in a bottomless abyss. Nicole's eyes never left and finally turned around and whispered, "Let's go." As she said this, she had already walked towards the path behind her, while Fidelia shrank and disappeared directly into the shell. At this moment, Li Ming's body was still lying on the platform motionless, like a corpse, and the platform was still sinking. His body looked calm, but his inner thoughts were already turbulent. If it were an ordinary alien, it would have naturally begun to mutate long ago, but Li Ming was different. His powerful spiritual consciousness had begun to ferment slowly in his brain, and a little bit of information was playing in his brain like a movie screen. The most critical of these was the information about the Orc civilization. The inheritance of the Orc civilization and the continuation of the race are completely dependent on other civilized races and non-civilized races. They extract high-quality genes of civilized creatures, and then use matrix technology to complete the combination, empty the memory, just like a formatted robot, and then implant the history of the Orc civilization, and become a complete Orc civilization. This is the continuation of this civilization. In other words, this civilization is also the enemy of all civilized creatures and non-civilized creatures, because special and excellent genes need to be obtained from civilized creatures and non-civilized creatures. The Orcs, the Zerg, humans, and aliens are all the objects of plunder by the Orc civilization. The more precious the civilized creatures are, the more precious the Orc or Zerg genes must be matched, and then the extremely powerful and perfect Orcs can be achieved. The synthesis of Orcs is not difficult, but the best Orcs are the most precious. The Orc gene injected into Li Ming's body is an extremely rare Orc gene, the unicorn. There are a large number of rare species among the Orcs, and the star beast is one of them, and the divine beast is just above the star beast. The preciousness of the divine beast is self-evident. Even the star beasts are extremely rare, not to mention the divine beasts. Even the genes injected into Li Ming's body are only a small part of the divine beast's body tissue. Simply put, the gene may come from a drop of blood or a layer of skin on the body of the divine beast, or even just a scale. However, for the Orc civilization, even if only such a small amount of tissue is obtained, this part of the gene can be cultivated to become stronger. This cultivation technology is extraordinary, just like the clone of the turboed beast. The difference is that the clone of the turboed beast can become stronger by obtaining external energy on its own, while the overall genes of other beasts need to spend a very long time and energy to cultivate. This Killing organization has been cultivated by the Orc civilization for tens of thousands of years, and has an independent consciousness, and its own strength is closer to the original body of the Killing. However, this kind of cultivation only stays on its own powerful energy, not cultivating a second Killing. This is a technology unique to the Orcs. This tiny organization has the strength of the original body, but needs a host. It perfectly merges with the host and becomes a new orc. Li Ming is now the host of this thing, which is also Li Ming's unique physical gene. The powerful spiritual civilization constantly protects Li Ming's consciousness. The Killen's consciousness and Li Ming began to attack each other frantically, just like two powerful forces fighting each other. As the struggle of consciousness intensified, Li Ming's body began to change. Scales began to form on the surface of the body, and the body began to twist and deform. As the changes continued, Li Ming also struggled with gritted teeth. Green light began to overflow from Li Ming's body, but the green light was also mixed with light yellow golden light. The two lights impacted each other, causing Li Ming's body to change constantly, sometimes covered with scales. Sometimes it returned to normal, as if two consciousnesses were fighting for the body. Li Ming had naturally experienced this kind of struggle for consciousness. The pain was self-evident. This was a battle for life. Only success could not fail, because the price of failure was death. Li Ming's face changed back and forth, and his consciousness gradually gained the upper hand. The green light began to cover the golden light little by little. Ah! An angry roar came from the depths of his heart. Just when Li Ming thought he had defeated the Killen consciousness, a huge golden shadow suddenly jumped out of Li Ming's body. Ah! A painful roar was heard, and Li Ming's body flew into the air. At this time, Li Ming's eyes suddenly opened, but the expression on his face was extremely painful. Sometimes he gritted his teeth, and sometimes his face was hideous, as if his body was not completely controlled by himself. I have expelled the other party's consciousness from the brain, but the body can't remove it from the flesh. He whispered in his mouth with a sad expression. The reason why King Wang had the upper hand just now was that the brain's consciousness defeated the Killen's consciousness. After all, Li Ming is a spiritual civilization, with wisdom eyes and wisdom, and his mental power is extraordinary. Naturally, this Killen is no match. But although the brain was defeated, this consciousness did not disappear from Li Ming's body and still existed. The huge phantom of the unicorn hand wrapped Li Ming's body in it, and Li Ming kept struggling in the phantom. Although he regained consciousness, his body could not get rid of the unicorn beast. The body was dominated by the brain consciousness. The brain's command was interrupted and interfered by the unicorn before it was conveyed to the body. As far as Li Ming's cognition was concerned, once consciousness invaded a body, it could not be eliminated or excluded from the body. The only thing that could be done was absorption. When Li Ming was still an ordinary human, it was by absorbing the consciousness of alien spiritual civilization that he began his journey to advanced civilization. When Meng Lionai's consciousness was invaded by Li Ming in the parallel universe, it was also Li Ming who helped her absorb the consciousness of alien civilization. But this is limited to civilized creatures. The unicorn belongs to the beast. Although it cannot be excluded from the body, it is naturally impossible to absorb its consciousness. Humans and beasts share the same consciousness, so consciousness is naturally greatly affected. Since it cannot be expelled from the body, then we can only. As he spoke, Li Ming's eyes suddenly widened a little. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and a ball of intense green flame suddenly burned up. The flame was so powerful that it engulfed the phantom unicorn beast in an instant. Such a sharp contrast has emerged. Outside Li Ming's body, which is less than 2 meters tall, there is a phantom unicorn that is more than 10 meters tall, but outside the phantom unicorn is a phantom flame that is more than 30 meters tall. The forces are suppressing each other. The green flame is obviously more powerful. The phantom unicorn can only struggle back and forth in it, and constantly roar in pain. The phantom flame began to shrink little by little. Every time the flame becomes smaller, the phantom unicorn can only shrink with it. The powerful green light phantom constantly suppresses the phantom of the unicorn. This suppression is like an object squeezing another object, shrinking it continuously. This is the seal. Chapter 577, Insect Tribe. The green flames became smaller and smaller, and the Killen phantom also entered Li Ming's body little by little as the green flames shrank. Li Ming's body gradually returned to normal, and there was no more pain on his face, but it was obviously not over yet. The phantom flames only burned on Li Ming's entire chest at this moment, and the Killen was also slowly swimming on the surface of Li Ming's chest. Li Ming's arms slowly raised, and the powerful energy aura made the clothes outside his body flutter constantly, as if they were blown by the wind. The raised hands were full of energy, and the muscles of his arms were constantly bulging. Li Ming gritted his teeth tightly. Li Ming suddenly raised his head and roared. Suddenly, the golden pattern spread around Li Ming's body with Li Ming's chest as the center, as if there was a pattern on Li Ming's body surface, but it suddenly appeared under some kind of stimulation. Dense patterns appeared on the back of his chest and on his arms, just like a picture of a Killin, but these were hidden under Li Ming's clothes, and only a small piece of pattern was exposed on his neck and wrists, like a tattoo. When the pattern was completely formed, Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief and his body returned to the ground little by little. He bent down and breathed deeply. "Finally, I sealed this guy up," he whispered, but as soon as he finished speaking, he sat down on the ground, looking exhausted. The so-called Sealies, that Li Ming uses his own powerful mental power to imprison it in his body, and it does not affect Li Ming's other body functions. At this moment, in an empty cave, everyone was talking about something. The whole cave is like a stalactite cave, with huge stalactites above the head, 100 meters high. The ground is also 500 or 600 meters wide, but the ground is not flat, with undulating stone pillars and huge rocks. Nicole's brown figure slowly floated 2 meters high, and a huge shell was placed on the rock not far away. Fidelia's blood-red flesh stretched out of the shell in the open shell. In addition to these two people, there was also a person standing on a stone pillar next to them. This person was quite strange. His entire body was a giant beetle, somewhat like a cicada, but his wings were indeed made of black hard matter. On the back of such a hard beetle, a black woman's upper body grew. This black upper body was somewhat similar to Fidelia, except that there was an extra pair of transparent wings on its back, and its body did not grow from the back of the beetle. It was more like a parasite that could blend into it. In other words, this person could appear or disappear from any part of the beetle. This person was Kinu, the insect man tribe. The insect man tribe was a branch of the orc civilization, also known as the pseudo-insect tribe. Civilized creatures used biotechnology to parasitize the bodies of designated powerful insects, gaining their powerful bodies and various abilities. Combined with the consciousness of civilized creatures, they had the same powerful abilities as the orcs. The body turned slightly on the hard shell, with a strange smile on his face, and said, "I heard that the orc civilization has just obtained a rare human gene. Can you share it with our insect people?" Nicole was calm and smiled slightly, and replied, "You are well informed. You knew it so quickly, but you are still a step late. We have already used this rare gene," Nicole said slowly. Key's face changed slightly, but it seemed to be expected. After a slight sigh, she said, "We are all orc civilizations. It is the same, whether you use it, or our insect people use it. It is all for the purpose of strengthening our race. Today, I mainly want to talk to you about the eye of the center of the earth." Nicole's expression immediately changed when she heard this, and said, "Does the eye of the center of the earth have coordinates?" Key's woman shook her head slightly and said, "There are no specific coordinates yet, but there is an approximate coordinate area. As the eye of God of our race, every time it is opened, is crucial to us. According to observations, there is a high probability that it will appear in the Hydra galaxy cluster this time." Key continued. Nicole's eyes widened immediately upon hearing this, and she looked embarrassed. After hesitating for a while, she said, "The place of Jingpo civilization? This may be more troublesome." Key nodded repeatedly and said, "That's why I was ordered to come here to discuss with you. At this time, the meaning of the top leaders is very clear, which is to completely eliminate the Jingpo civilization and control the Hydra galaxy cluster." Nicole's eyes widened immediately upon hearing this, and her face showed a solemn expression. She did not respond immediately. Fidelia, who had been silent, turned her eyes to Nicole, and then to Key. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Is it unrealistic to destroy the Jingpo civilization? In our Hydra Centaurus supercluster, there are many members of the Jingpo civilization in the Pumi civilization of the second level civilization world. They have always been the first to attack us. If we take the initiative, wouldn't it be?" Key waved her hand gently and replied, "I know this. Don't worry. The top leaders will give us instructions. Once the arrangements are in place, it will be time to act. Besides, it will take some time for the eye of the earth to appear. I just came to inform you today that you must be fully prepared so that we will not be caught off guard after the top leaders give instructions. Nicole nodded slowly and said, that's easy to say. To be honest, the human gene we obtained this time is extremely rare, and we adopted overall synthesis. Compared with the previous cultivation technology, it greatly shortens the time. If we can use it before launching an attack on the Jingpo civilization, it will be very beneficial to our war. Nicole continued. Such a confident statement made Kinu's eyes light up, and she said, Nichol, you are exaggerating a bit. Nicole looked solemn, snorted, and said, this time we directly use the Killin gene that has been cultivated for a long time. Do you think it's exaggerated? When she heard the word Killin, Kinu suddenly shook her body, as if she had heard something extremely shocking. She looked at the other party with wide eyes. You mean, the Killin that the half-orc Winhan has been cultivating? Kinu seemed a little bit unbelievable. Nicole looked at the other party's surprised expression, and didn't feel too strange. After all, the cultivation of Killin has been a long time, and it is the most precious item in the entire half-orc civilization. Before the appearance of a suitable source body, this thing will never be used easily. Nicole nodded and replied, you should also know that we are all waiting for the source of the Killin, but there has been no suitable one, and the top leaders have been urging us. This is related to the rise of our entire orc civilization. Now that it has appeared, I naturally have to make a prompt decision and implement it immediately. Kinu's eyes rolled, and her expression changed slightly, as if the source of the Killin was of great importance. She said, does the top leaders know about this? Nicole shook her head slightly and replied, although this matter is of great importance, I still want to wait for a result before reporting it. Kinu also nodded, hesitated for a moment, and said, can I take a look first? Nicole paused after hearing this, and immediately showed a look of satisfaction, and smiled. Okay, of course you can, but I have told you so much today, and there is something I must tell you. This matter cannot be informed to the upper level for the time being. Kinu smiled thoughtfully and said, don't worry, we are in the same Laputa galaxy, and we are an independent collective. Naturally, we will not tell the upper level about this. Nicole nodded in satisfaction and said, okay, let's go. I'll take you to see it. As she spoke, Nicole moved and flew to the far end of the cave. With a flash of light, several people appeared in another huge cave at the same time. 3 suspended paths led directly to a huge circular platform in the middle, and on the circular platform was a square matrix. This was the place where the Killin was injected into Li Ming's body. Standing on the edge of the entire cave, Nicole raised her hand. At this time, a circular platform slowly rose from the dark bottom. The circular platform continued to rise. At first, nothing could be seen except darkness, but after waiting for a while, the circular platform slowly came into view. As the circular platform got higher and higher, the objects on it became clearer and clearer. Nicole's originally smiling face gradually disappeared as the circular platform became clearer, because there was nothing on the circular platform. This made Nicole's expression suddenly tense, a little nervous, staring at the circular platform with wide eyes, revealing a questioning look. Fidelia and Key both saw this scene. Key looked at Nicole with a puzzled look, while Fidelia frowned and said immediately, I'll go down and take a look. Chapter 578 Prison. Fidelia's body immediately retracted into the shell, and as the shell closed, the entire shell gradually disappeared. When the shell reappeared, it had appeared at the bottom of the dark abyss. The shell slowly opened, and a red body crawled out of it. Fidelia looked up and looked around. There was nothing at the bottom of the abyss. The originally small area could be completely covered by a single sense, but when Fidelia realized that there was nothing, her face froze instantly. Her body quickly retracted into the shell and disappeared again. Back to the edge of the cave wall above, shells emerged from the void. Fidelia leaned out with an excited expression on her face. When she looked at Nicole and was about to say something, she suddenly stopped. Her expression relaxed and said, this guy is in a mutation period now, so it's inconvenient to watch. Nicole saw that Fidelia had discovered the abnormality. After hesitating for a moment, she smiled slightly, looked at Kinu, and said, since it's inconvenient to watch, we can only wait until the results come out. Keanu looked back and forth between the two of them, occasionally glancing at the abyss below, and finally sighed slightly, and said, "In that case, let's wait and see another day." As they spoke, the three of them left the place one after another, and after returning to the previous cave, Nicole immediately turned his eyes to Fidelia, and said with a somewhat ugly expression, "Tell me, what happened just now?" Fidelia also immediately replied, "That guy disappeared." Disappeared? Nicole was shocked. Nicole had expected many results, but had not thought that Li Ming would disappear. When she heard this result, her face changed several times and she said, "Quick, seal off the big star. Do your best to find this person." "Yes." Fidelia replied immediately. At this moment, a crack slowly appeared on a huge rock, just like a hole suddenly appeared on a calm surface of water. Then Li Ming's figure slowly emerged from it, rising from it like an elevator, and at the same time, the surface of his body flashed with blue light, which looked extraordinary. As soon as he appeared, Li Ming carefully looked around. The surroundings were desolate and there was nothing unusual, just a little dark. Finally escaped. This place is not suitable for staying for a long time. As he said this, he turned his right hand and a metal capsule emerged from his hand. Then he threw it, and the metal capsule slowly floated into the air. Bang! A bright light flashed, and a spaceship emerged. Li Ming's body flashed with blue light and entered it. The spaceship then started, and flew quickly into the sky. Li Ming didn't know before that there was a second zone of the second level civilization in the Orc civilization. Now that he has mastered this information, Li Ming naturally wants to escape quickly. Otherwise, he will be in real danger. But just as Li Ming's spaceship flew out, a red light suddenly flashed in the sky, and a barrier had already emerged. Upon detecting this, Li Ming's face changed immediately, and stopped the spaceship. Planet barrier. This is the technology of a second level civilization. Li Ming whispered, and his face also changed. It is not difficult to build a barrier for the entire planet. The first level civilization also exists, but the difference is that the technology of the second level civilization is more advanced, and the investment and effect of building the barrier are more obvious, which is not comparable to the first level civilization. Looking at it with both eyes, Li Ming can only turn the spaceship back to the ground. The high-end technological weapons of the second level civilization can directly destroy a planet, but similarly, the planet can also build a powerful defense mechanism to resist such an attack. Attack and defense are very common in civilizations of the same level. Just like the offensive and defensive system of humans on Earth, there are offensive missiles. There are defensive interceptions, and each other's technology is generated by each other. The same is true for cosmic civilization, but if the second level civilization attacks the world of the first level civilization, the result will be very different. The first level civilization has not yet established a strong planetary defense system, so it will naturally be destroyed when attacked. Li Ming's spaceship returned to the ground, a blue light flashed, and his body returned to the rock just now. He raised his right hand slightly, and the spaceship in the sky flashed with light, and it turned into a capsule again, and fell into Li Ming's hand. The blue light on the body surface flashed, and Li Ming's body once again merged into the rock. Li Ming, who has wisdom, can maximize the ability of the element tribe of the intelligent civilization, and establish an energy field through his own energy. The elemental objects in this field will also be under Li Ming's control. However, Li Ming's ability is limited in scope, and only objects in a fixed area are affected, but this is enough for Li Ming to completely hide himself. Filang searched everywhere on behalf of Li Ming, and Li Ming was also sneaking underground. Since he couldn't escape, Li Ming still had to find Dempsey's whereabouts. Find this person and rescue him, and Li Ming will get a ticket to the world of the second level civilization. While sneaking underground, Filang began to find abnormalities on the surface. A large number of spaceships began to appear in the sky. These spaceships flew slowly and carefully searched every corner, regardless of whether the other party was searching for him. Li Ming, who was underground, was not worried. After sneaking for a distance, a mountain appeared in front of Filang. It looked like a mountain, but there were aircraft or small spaceships constantly entering and leaving the mountain. Obviously, this mountain was not simple. Inside the mountain was a base. The structure of the base was the same as a mountain, similar to a pyramid, one layer after another, with houses, corridors, and a huge arsenal. In one of the rooms, a half-orc with an alien upper body and 4 legs was concentrating on the blue light pattern on the wall. The pattern was the terrain of the nearby area, and it showed every corner in detail, and the flying spaceships appeared on the pattern in the form of light spots. As he was watching carefully, a figure suddenly rose slowly on the ground behind him, and the hard ground seemed like soft water. This person is Li Ming. As soon as he appeared, he raised his hand and grabbed it. A green shadow hand grabbed the other person's brain. Without waiting for the other person to react, he pulled it back with force, and his soul was already extracted. With a thump, the body fell to the bottom, and the soul was instantly absorbed by the green shadow hand. 2 steps ago, he looked at the pattern in front of him with his eyes, raised his hand and lightly tapped it, and the light of the pattern twisted and changed, and an underground base emerged. The base of the mountain is only the surface part, and deep underground at the bottom of the mountain, there is a huge underground base. Source prison. Li Ming's face was lifted and he whispered, "There is a huge prison under the bottom of the mountain, and the structure is on the pattern in front of him." Looking at Li Ming, he immediately turned around and walked out of the room. As he walked, Li Ming's body twisted and changed. When he arrived at the portal, Li Ming's body had transformed into the appearance of the half-orc just now. This half-orc is called Fellaini, the deputy warden. The base is just a surface job, and his most important responsibility is to guard the source prison. Li Ming also obtained a lot of additional information from his consciousness. The first is the planetary barrier that Li Ming is concerned about. Although the planetary barrier is powerful, its energy consumption is also huge. Such a powerful barrier consumes the energy of the planet every second, so this barrier will only be opened in extremely dangerous and necessary situations. This high consumption barrier will not continue to be open, and this consumption is not easy to bear. If Li Ming wants to leave, he can wait for it to close before finding a way to leave. The other thing is about the source prison. This prison holds the source bodies of the orcs, and is also the key to the inheritance of the orcs. There are many prisons like this on the big star, but the situation of each prison is different. Some imprison civilized creatures, aliens, or humans, and some prisons imprison uncivilized creatures, orcs or zerg. The reason why they are imprisoned is that these source bodies are relatively precious, and there is no suitable matching body. It is very important for different source bodies to match each other. Only in this way can we get better orcs, which is also the top priority of the orc inheritance. The prison controlled by the Draenei is the source prison of civilized creatures, so Li Ming wants to go and see what's going on. After all, if Dempsey was imprisoned on the big star, it is very likely that he was captured here as a source. Chapter 579, Delphin's Secret. There is no information about Dempsey in the consciousness of Draenei, which makes Li Ming a little worried about this prison. After all, as the deputy warden, he should be familiar with the information here. After passing through 2 portals, Li Ming came to the entrance of a corridor. The whole corridor is hundreds of meters long. The lights at the end are bright, and you can see the end by standing there. According to the information obtained by Li Ming, the portal cannot directly reach the entrance of the prison. You must pass through the corridor in front of you. Li Ming has already transformed into a Draenei, so he doesn't need to care. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, and Li Ming's figure approached the end of the corridor little by little. There were 2 soldiers guarding the end of the corridor, and there was also a barrier, like a door. When Li Ming approached, the 2 soldiers saluted. One of the soldiers raised his hand and touched the switch, and the barrier disappeared directly. Li Ming followed and entered it. As soon as he walked in, the barrier closed by itself. Li Ming came to a bright space, like an opposing room, but more like a main control room. There was a portal in the middle of the room, and there were blue light pictures and a lot of information on the walls around. There were people walking around in the room. They were the staff here. The information on the wall was the information of the prisoners here. Li Ming stood in the middle of the room and looked around. A lot of information came into his eyes little by little. These information recorded in detail the imprisoned source bodies here, the origin, name, image and other information of each source body. The source body prison where Li Ming was now was the source body from the local galaxy group, which was the source body plundered by the orc civilization when it attacked the local galaxy group last time. After a simple check, Li Ming shook his head slightly. There was no Dempsey that Li Ming was looking for in these information, but after careful observation, two names still entered Li Ming's sight. One was Tanjing, and the other was Biggs. Tanjing's fate was naturally within Li Ming's expectations. When he heard the information that he wanted to take revenge, Li Ming already understood that with the strength of the orcs, how could this person be the opponent of the orcs? The next one was Biggs. Biggs was an aerospace civilization that Li Ming met in the inner system of the Milky Way. Later, for various reasons, he followed Cottrell, the eccentric. The appearance of the two names at the same time only reminded Li Ming of the past. The two people were from the aerospace civilization and were imprisoned together here, so it was not surprising. After reading the list of personnel, Li Ming turned around and left directly. Li Ming's situation was also very dangerous now. It was already very difficult to protect himself, not to mention saving these two people. Li Ming needed to find Dempsey's whereabouts first, and then wait for the planet's barrier to disappear before he could find a way to leave the planet. Therefore, Tanjing and Biggs were not in Li Ming's plan. But just as Li Ming was about to leave, a new name entered Li Ming's field of vision, Delphin. This name was unfamiliar to Li Ming, but this name was very important in the consciousness of Drini. Li Ming absorbed the consciousness of Drini, but Li Ming did not fully grasp all the information in the consciousness. However, after seeing this name, Drini attached great importance to this name in his consciousness, just like a memory point in people's subtle influence. It seemed that this person was extremely important. Seeing this, Li Ming pointed at the name, and a blue light shot out from his hand. The blue light flashed, sank into the pattern on the wall and disappeared directly. After this command was issued, the bottom of the pattern suddenly flashed slightly, and a portal appeared. Li Ming walked over quickly, his figure flashed, and he disappeared into the portal. When Li Ming appeared again, he had come to a wide room. The whole room was empty, more than 10 meters long and wide, and there was a portal at the end of the room. Just a rough look, Li Ming immediately knew his position. If the mountain on the surface is a pyramid with a body facing upward, then the underground model is a pyramid with the whole body facing downward, and Li Ming is at the top of this underground pyramid. The scene here is very familiar to the Drini. He looked at the portal in front of him, walked over quickly, and stopped in front of the portal. His expression tightened, and a series of information kept turning in his mind. After a few seconds of simple thinking, Li Ming raised his hand and pointed, and the portal burst. Li Ming smiled slightly, and walked over quickly. This portal has a barrier, just like a password door. To open it, you need a specific key. Li Ming, who has the consciousness of Drini, naturally knows a password. After passing through the portal, Li Ming came to an independent space. It was very bright, but small in area. The four walls were all smooth stone slabs. These stone slabs had a heavy energy atmosphere, and were natural barriers. In the middle of the room, an alien was bound by 4 iron chains, and could not move. The chains on the alien's body connected the 4 stone pillars around it. Although he could move his body, his range of movement could only be maintained in the middle of the 4 stone pillars. Iron chains can suppress energy. Li Ming was very clear about this. Naturally, the alien in front of him could not escape the fate of being suppressed. The surface of this alien's body was crystallized, just like a life composed of small crystals. Li Ming only took a rough look, and immediately understood that this person was a silicon-based life. Drini, are you here to interrogate me again? Delphin said coldly. Li Ming looked calm, his eyes narrowed, the ability of the wisdom eye was activated, and the information about this person also emerged bit by bit. Despite this, Li Ming did not frown, and his face showed doubt. From the memory of the Drini, this guy actually. Li Ming's expression tightened, and he looked at Delphian intently. All that could be presented in Li Ming's mind were the information related to Delphian and the Drini consciousness, not from the consciousness of Delphian's brain. Although he used the wisdom eye, Li Ming could not obtain the consciousness in Delphian's brain, because Delphian's consciousness was equipped with a consciousness barrier. Delphian came from the Pumi civilization, which is a second-level civilization world of the Hydra Centaurus supercluster. This is at the same level as the Dulang civilization of this supercluster, both of which are second-level civilization worlds. Delphian sneaked into the Great Star, and his purpose was unknown to the Orc civilization, but he was captured because of his sneaking in. The only information the orcs had was that Delphine belonged to the Pumi civilization. Other information had never been obtained. Although the orcs also had people with spiritual abilities, they could not break through Delphine's consciousness barrier. Looking at Delphine in front of him, Li Ming said, "So you must know a lot of secrets." This sentence made Delphine pause. After hesitating for a while, he looked puzzled. At this time, Li Ming was very clear about Delphine's thoughts. Drina had never spoken to him so gently before. It was inevitable that he was surprised to hear what Li Ming said. "Huh, he." Delphine sneered, his mouth corners slightly raised, and said, "No matter what you say, you can't get any information you want from me. I advise you to give up this idea. It's better to just kill me." Li Ming looked at the other party back and forth, with a dull expression on his face, but Li Ming's eyes opened slightly. The eyeballs moved slightly in the eye sockets, and a cyan triangle appeared in the round eyeballs. But a strange force broke through the air. Delphine, who had a disdainful look on his face a second ago, was immediately startled, and his expression froze instantly. Phantom Dragon. The powerful energy spread out, and Li Ming's consciousness instantly invaded Delphine's brain. Although he controlled most of Delphine's consciousness, there was still a door that had not been opened. That is, the consciousness barrier, which ordinary spiritual civilization naturally could not open. But Li Ming was extraordinary. He had spiritual civilization and the ability of wisdom eyes. Li Ming could use the active ability of wisdom eyes to forcibly obtain information that the passive ability of wisdom eyes could not obtain. More importantly, Li Ming also had the ability bonus of 6 domains to strengthen the star. In Delphine's brain, Li Ming saw the door, moved his body, turned into a flying dragon and rushed in. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and intermittent pictures began to appear in front of Li Ming's eyes. These were exactly the information about Delphine's consciousness, but most of them had been fragmented. Obviously, in addition to the barrier, Delphine had other means of consciousness shielding. Li Ming captured this information and connected it together bit by bit. Even if he could not obtain the detailed content, Li Ming could still get the general information. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 580 Intelligence Information. Delphine slowly opened his eyes. Although he didn't know what he had just experienced, he knew very well that it was definitely not a good thing. In his blurred vision, everything he saw seemed to be covered by a layer of gauze. His brain was in a state of headache, and his consciousness began to recover gradually. When his vision gradually became clear, the figure of the Drina in front of him was already very clear. "Drina, what did you do to me?" he said weakly. Li Ming just looked at him quietly, smiled slightly, and said, "I just want to see what secrets you have. Humph, no matter what you do, it's in vain." Delphine still said confidently. Li Ming raised his mouth slightly, looked at him with contempt, and said, "Delphine, you were ordered to sneak into the Orc civilization to obtain intelligence. Is this a secret?" Upon hearing this, Delphine frowned, his expression tense, and he became nervous. He looked at Li Ming in disbelief with trembling lips. After hesitating for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "Drina, I admit that I'm from the Pumi civilization, but there has never been a conflict between the second level civilization world and the Orc civilization. Are you trying to provoke a war by saying this?" Li Ming snorted and said, "Delphine, isn't it the second level civilization world that is preparing to start a war?" Delphine looked shocked and looked at Li Ming with an unbelievable expression. Li Ming's body suddenly twisted at this time, and he transformed from Fellaini back to Li Ming's original appearance. This change made Drina's expression change again. His eyes showed strange colors, his mouth opened slightly, and he began to think on his own. Li Ming continued, "Pumi civilization has always wanted to destroy the Orc civilization, and not only Pumi civilization." Before Li Ming finished speaking, Delphine suddenly continued, "Who are you? You are not from the Orc civilization." Li Ming stared at the other party and whispered, "I have nothing to do with orcs, but I'm still very interested in your secrets." As Li Ming was talking, the portal behind him suddenly flashed with light, and a huge figure suddenly appeared. Delphine immediately looked up behind Li Ming, and Li Ming also frowned and glanced behind him. As soon as the alien came in, the blade-like tentacles stabbed Li Ming. Li Ming dodged directly. Another intruder. The new alien looked at Li Ming viciously. Li Ming also looked at the other party coldly. The lower body of this alien was a piece of shell and tentacles, like the tail of a shrimp, and the upper body, except for the chest and head, was an alien, and the arms were completely two big hands of the orcs, like sharp bear paws. There were several blade-like tentacles under the two arms. Delphine glanced at him, then at Li Ming, and finally said coldly, "Warden, Waldro." Li Ming also became cautious. The warden named Waldro was actually a 2.4 level civilization. Waldro glanced at Li Ming and Delphine, snorted coldly, and whispered, "I have said it before, these intruders should be killed directly." While speaking, Waldro turned his eyes and looked at Delphine, who was unable to move. He moved his body and rushed directly to Delphine. Two blade-like tentacles pierced in from both sides, and the sharp tentacles stopped with a bang 1 meter away from Delphine's body. The tentacles were blocked by a golden barrier, and Li Ming stood behind Delphine, with his eyes slightly raised, and the cyan triangle pattern was particularly conspicuous in his eye sockets. Li Ming's rescue surprised Delphine. With a horrified look, he turned his eyes to the back of him. Sure enough, the intruders are all together. Waldro said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, Waldro's face darkened, and a huge palm suddenly raised up and slapped the two people from top to bottom. Li Ming's brows tightened when he saw this, and a white light flashed in his right hand. The light blade flew out of his hand, and the big hand pointed at the sky and stabbed directly. Seeing Li Ming's light blade, the big hand did not stop at all, and continued to slap it down at a high speed. Bang! A violent sound was heard, and Li Ming's palm directly pressed against the other party's palm, and the white light blade also directly pierced the other party's arm. Despite this, the huge palm still formed a high pressure posture, as if it was going to smack Li Ming and Delphine into meat patties. The power of this palm was so strong that Li Ming could not support it at all. At this time, he had an ashing expression, as if he had used all his strength. Ah. Li Ming opened his mouth and shouted, and a strong energy aura burst out from his body. With a series of bang 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 sounds, the bursting energy continued to explode from Li Ming's body like balloons. Waldro's palm was bounced off again and again, and at the same time, the stone pillars and chains around him were broken and disconnected under the impact of energy. Li Ming's expression was tense, and he was breathing heavily. Delphine in front of him was no longer bound by the chains, and was also free. However, Delphine was very weak now. Facing a level 2.4 civilization, it was obviously very dangerous. The guy named Waldro in front of him was already the second civilization of this level that Li Ming had encountered on the big star. As Li Ming guessed, this seemed to be a level 2 civilization world, and there was a risk of being killed at any time. Just when Li Ming was about to do something, Delphine in front of him suddenly turned around, raised his hand, and grasped Li Ming's palm. At the moment of shaking hands, green light passed from his hand to Li Ming's hand. "Although I don't know who you are, since you are willing to save me, I will send you away." Delphine shouted loudly, and the palm holding Li Ming suddenly exerted force, and its powerful energy wrapped Li Ming's body. Li Ming only felt a rectangular energy body on his body rotating continuously, and the space energy was floating continuously. Puff! The sharp tentacles pierced Delphine's body, and blood spurted out of the wound, and blood also flowed out of Delphine's mouth. No one wants to leave here," Waldro said viciously. Delphine ignored him, just glanced behind him, and then his eyes returned to Li Ming and said, "Leave here." As he spoke, Delphine's eyes changed slightly when he looked at Li Ming, as if he was saying something, and Li Ming just looked at him and immediately sensed his thoughts. Bang! Li Ming's body disappeared on the spot. When Li Ming reappeared, he was already in a mountain valley. The rectangular energy on his body had disappeared, but Li Ming looked around and immediately locked onto the mountain not far away. "This guy actually," Li Ming whispered. "This Delphine's ability is indeed extraordinary." The teleportation just now actually sent Li Ming out of the cave. Li Ming looked down at his palm, and a ball of green light slowly rotated in his hand. This ball of green light was just the consciousness that Delphine had just given to Li Ming. Li Ming clenched his palm and collected this consciousness. He looked at the mountain in the distance again and flew away. Delphine's teleportation ability is far superior to Li Ming's. Although Delphine is only a second level civilization, the teleportation ability that Li Ming learned is only a low level civilization star. It cannot teleport objects like Delphine. Even the current teleportation strength is under the support of Li Ming's powerful energy. The reason why Delphine teleported Li Ming away is also related to the consciousness it gave to Li Ming. Even if Delphine teleported out, he couldn't leave, so he placed his hope on Li Ming. The consciousness he gave to Li Ming completely preserved his own secrets. Li Ming had limited information from his consciousness, but with this consciousness, Li Ming also got all the information. Delphine was ordered by the top leaders of the Pumi civilization to sneak into the big star to explore the development of the Orc civilization. This civilization that rose later has seriously affected the balance of the Hydra Centauri supercluster. Of course, its impact is not only these, but also indirectly affects the balance of this supercluster, which will be very dangerous. Chapter 581 Planetary Defense System. This supercluster is controlled by the Dulang civilization, and its subordinate galaxy groups and clusters are also strictly controlled by various organizations. While maintaining a stable order, it also protects the balance of the second-level civilization world to a great extent. This is an inevitable move for the second-level civilization world of the supercluster to maintain itself. The Pumi civilization, which is also a second-level civilization world of the supercluster, is already facing challenges. Because the energy that the second-level civilization can develop is not developed by the first-level civilization. In this way, the fixed second-level civilization life can enjoy the energy and resources in a certain area. However, if a second-level civilization world is born in this area, the resources and energy will be challenged, and it will also be threatened, so the rise of the Orc civilization must be curbed. There are 3 teams in the infiltration operation, namely Dempsey from the Dulang civilization, Delphine from the Pumi civilization, and 1 person from the Jingpo civilization. The Jingpo civilization does not belong to the second-level civilization world, but to the Hydra galaxy cluster. However, due to the distance, this galaxy cluster is the direct target of the Orc civilization, and has suffered greatly. Although it does not have the strength to fight, the civilization has never given up revenge. The 3-person team successfully infiltrated, but Dempsey and the man from the Jingpo civilization were killed, and only Delphine survived. This infiltration plan failed, but fortunately the essence of the plan was not discovered. The purpose of the infiltration was to find out the development of the big star and the planet's offensive and defensive arrangements, so as to lay the groundwork for the subsequent attack. Although Delphine obtained valuable information, he was unable to transmit it, which was the most regrettable, but in the end he handed the information to Li Ming, and placed this hope on Li Ming. Li Ming has fully mastered this information. The offensive and defensive system of the big star has just taken shape, and has not yet reached the standard of the second-level civilized world. But the development speed of this civilization is extremely fast. The number of second-level civilizations is also increasing day by day, which has a lot to do with the physique of the Orc civilization. The advancement of the Orcs does not require material assistance, but energy. But the Orcs do not have the same way of obtaining energy as civilized creatures. Although civilized creatures have a variety of high-tech ways to obtain energy, they need material assistance to advance. The Orcs have integrated these 2 points, and the cost of advancement will naturally be reduced. According to the information obtained by Delphine, the number of Orcs with the second-level civilization has reached 20 people. Although not as many as the second-level civilization world, its growth rate is alarming and very dangerous. With this information, Li Ming now has to leave this place as soon as possible. At this time, at the bottom of the prison, Waldro was angry. A corpse was crawling on the ground in front of him. It was Delphine. A beep sound was heard, and Waldro's big hand slowly raised up. The palm of his hand flashed with blue light, and a phantom pattern had formed. A vague figure appeared in the pattern, and as soon as they met, he said coldly, "Waldro, are you back?" Waldro replied, "I just arrived at the prison, but something unexpected happened here. The vague figure in the image immediately said, "Contact Delaney, we have lost a new source. This source is very important to us, you need to find him, as soon as possible." Waldo's face instantly became solemn when he heard this, and replied, "My base has just been invaded, and Delaney is dead." The vague figure in the image was shocked and said, "Now the big star has been completely closed, and I have transmitted the information of the source to you. Find this source first." As he spoke, a blue light flashed, and a human-shaped image emerged in the blue light. "I will arrange someone to deal with the intruder, but this source must not run away," the vague figure said viciously. But when he saw the humanoid image presented by the blue light, Waldro's eyes widened and he said, "He is the source." The fuzzy image was slightly shocked when he saw Waldro's expression and said, "What? Have you seen him?" Waldro's face showed a look of gritting his teeth, but he could only reply, "The invader I just found here is him. I will chase him immediately." "What?" the fuzzy image scolded. At this moment, Li Ming was still walking slowly in the deep mountains. The main buildings of this orc civilization were all underground, and the surface was a natural environment. It looked like there was nothing unusual. Even if there were buildings, they were extremely few. This extremely subtle concealment of the overall strength of this civilization, it is no wonder that the advanced civilization sent people to infiltrate and investigate. According to the information Li Ming obtained from Delphin, Li Ming already knew the location of the defense system of the big star. Destroying its defense system would be the key to Li Ming's departure. Walking in the deep mountains and jungles, the terrain of the big star was already under Li Ming's control. Li Ming stopped walking until he was in front of the sea. He stood on the cliff on the shore, looking at the ocean in the distance, and whispered, "The defense system is hidden in the depths of the sea. It's really hidden. As an important weapon, the planetary defense system must have many barriers to protect it in addition to being hidden." Li Ming looked at the distance of the sea, his head sank slightly, and looked at the bottom of the cliff. Plop, a sea beast jumped out of the sea, and fell back into the sea again, tumbling in the waves, twisting its body constantly, as if conquering the impact of the waves here. Li Ming looked at the sea beast that was constantly tumbling against the waves, and suddenly jumped into the ocean below. Plop. The waves splashed, and Li Ming's body entered the sea water, but at the moment, when his body jumped into the sea water, his flesh suddenly twisted and deformed, turning into the appearance of the sea beast just now. Facing the wind and waves, Li Ming turned into a sea beast, and swam straight to the depths of the sea. As his body swayed, his body surface kept flashing blue light, and his forward speed was extremely fast. There were constant winds and waves on the sea, and the sea water was constantly churning under the sea breeze, but the deep sea bed was calm. After swimming for a while, Li Ming could gradually see the calm construction area on the seabed. The construction area here is a hole, just like the objects that exist on the seabed itself. The hole is dark and there is nothing unusual, but Li Ming can clearly see the layers of barriers through his own wisdom eyes. The barriers here are not physical barriers, but inductive barriers. Any object entering will be detected. Li Ming kept swimming, and as he got closer and closer, Li Ming gradually discovered that the deep seabed actually contained a lot of energy. There are a few ruins on the seabed here, but most of them are hard rocks. The energy is overflowing from the rocks, just like a natural energy mine. Li Ming did not put these inductive barriers in his eyes. With his strong mental power, Li Ming was able to easily avoid the induction of the barriers. Despite this, Li Ming was still extremely cautious. Li Ming passed through the layers of barriers one by one, and came to the front of the huge building. His figure slowly stopped and approached the building. The building here is made of special materials, which are flexible, but also extremely hard. His body was close to the surface of the building. A green light flashed out from Li Ming's body. The green light was in a phantom state, and it was the flying dragon. Passing through the hard building, the flying dragon shuttled freely in it, and the situation inside also entered Li Ming's eyes. The building looked dark on the outside, but it was very bright inside, just like daytime. There were various rooms and passages, and many soldiers guarding. However, in front of the phantom flying dragon, all obstacles were like nothing. After a while of shuttle, the flying dragon came to a circular room. In the center of the room was a red energy sphere, which was huge, more than 10 meters long and wide. The energy inside was churning and rolling, which looked extraordinary. and below the energy sphere was a bowl-shaped platform connected to a metal column, like a candlestick. This is the system of the planetary defense barrier. Li Ming muttered to himself as he looked back and forth at the object in front of him. As Li Ming saw, this was the planetary defense energy, which supported the defense barrier of the entire planet. But Li Ming could not approach directly, because there was an extremely powerful barrier near this energy ball. Chapter 582 Undersea Explosion. The strength of this barrier is extraordinary, like a wall formed by an illusion. It appears and disappears from time to time. This strength can be clearly seen by the wisdom eye. It is several times stronger than the previous Earth core cage. It is naturally impossible to rely on the flying dragon to break it. Li Ming needs to dive into it himself. Li Ming's figure in the ocean outside twisted slightly and suddenly thrust hard towards the seabed. The whole beast figure drilled into it and disappeared. A moment later, in the closed room, Li Ming's body slowly rose from the ground and came to the location of the energy ball system just now. There was no one around, only the red sphere in front of him, and the barrier on the surface of the red energy ball appeared and disappeared from time to time, and no flaws could be seen. Then, I can only destroy it by force. As he said this, Li Ming's right hand suddenly clenched hard, and a sizzling sound was heard, and a light energy sword appeared in his hand. He aimed at the barrier in front of him, and slashed it directly. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and the whole room shook, as if there was an earthquake, and the orcs in this construction area all felt the vibration. Buzz! The alarm sounded, and Li Ming quickly focused on the barrier in front of him. There was already a crack. The strength was much stronger than Li Ming had imagined. He clenched his right hand again, and a beam of blue light was released from his right hand. The soft blue light was like a long snake winding around the white light blade. Li Ming, who had wisdom, could enhance the strength of the light blade. The blue and white light of the light blade flashed alternately, and Li Ming swung it and hit it. Snap! Like a piece of glass being shattered, the entire barrier disappeared in an instant. Li Ming was overjoyed when he saw this. But at this moment, a light suddenly flashed in one part of the room. A half-orc walked out. The half-orc's body was dark brown, his flesh was all strong muscles, and his body was wearing tough armor. His head looked a bit like an ancient man, and there was purple hair on his head. In his right hand, he held a purple bone. His body was more than 3 meters tall, showing his fierce momentum. As soon as he saw Li Ming, he gritted his teeth and swung the bone to hit Li Ming. Li Ming was shocked and jumped away. Bang! The huge bone hit the ground, and the whole house trembled slightly. The ground did not change at all. The orc raised his eyes and stared at Li Ming. He moved again and rushed towards Li Ming. Li Ming had no intention of fighting. He waved his right hand and 5 small objects shot out from his hand. These 5 small objects were not big and silver in appearance. They were high explosive metal capsules. Moreover, Li Ming did not throw them at the orcs on the opposite side, but at the red energy ball. The 4 metal capsules were like 4 small stones. With a light plop, they fell into the red ball. Seeing this, Li Ming smiled slightly and showed a proud look on his face. But when the angry orc saw this situation, he shouted "Ah!" and looked at the red energy ball with his eyes wide open and trembling. The head turned slightly, and the eyes gradually returned to Li Ming. His lips kept trembling, and the sharp teeth appeared and disappeared under the trembling lips. The muscles on his face were already tense, and sparks seemed to burst out of his eyes. Li Ming, who was originally smiling, suddenly disappeared when he saw the other party's expression. The two just looked at each other, and the angry half-orc shouted like crazy, like the roar of a beast, and the palm holding the bone was shaking. You're dead. The half-orc roared, moved his body, and flew towards Li Ming. This half-orc was a level 2.4 civilization. At this moment, looking at the other party's angry expression, Li Ming already deeply felt that things were very bad. Not daring to stay any longer, Li Ming turned and flew away quickly. The surface of his body flashed with blue light, and a round blue halo appeared on Li Ming's body. This blue halo wrapped Li Ming in it, so that when Li Ming approached the wall, his body passed through the wall softly. The energy control of Wukong's ability can control multiple elements, which makes all elemental objects make way for Li Ming, and then close up, to restore their original appearance. Although this ability is powerful, it also consumes a lot of energy. With this ability, Li Ming easily penetrated the wall and flew straight to the sea outside. According to ordinary aliens, they need to go through the portal or passage of the building to bypass and leave, but Li Ming flew straight to the outside, and any obstacles would be easily passed. But behind Li Ming, there was indeed a bang 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 sound. The orc actually used his strong body to directly knock a hole in the wall. This guy, is he crazy? Li Ming continued to go out, and the orc behind him was still chasing him. When Li Ming left the building and came to the sea, the orc actually knocked a hole in the surface of the building and continued to chase Li Ming. Seawater continued to flow into it along the broken hole. The orc grinned and continued to pounce on Li Ming. Boom. A huge explosion sounded, and after a sound, boom, boom, there was another series of noises, and the building below was shattered and exploded directly under the impact of the explosion. The shock wave generated by the explosion pushed the seawater to churn, and Li Ming felt that his body was floating directly to the distance in the surging seawater. Facing the violent churning seawater, Li Ming's body was like an ant floating with the seawater. This movement trajectory was completely irregular, up and down, and his body was constantly rolling. Under this force, Li Ming could not control his body at all, and after a while, Li Ming's body gradually regained stability. At this time, he was already in the distant ocean, and there were still debris floating around, all of which were debris that had been stirred up from the seabed when the explosion just happened. Li Ming looked up and moved towards the sea. His body slowly floated out of the seawater, and he looked down at the sea. It was calm and there was nothing unusual, except for the gusts of sea breeze and waves. He looked up at the sky, and the red barrier had disappeared. Li Ming then raised his hand, and took out a metal capsule. A flash of light hummed, and the capsule shone brightly. A spaceship had been formed. Then a blue light flashed, and Li Ming entered the spaceship directly. In the main cabin, Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief, and lightly tapped the console, and a certain coordinate had been locked. But at this moment, a light bang sounded, and the entire spaceship trembled slightly. Li Ming was shocked, and the next moment, a loud boom sounded, and the orc just now actually tore the spaceship directly into the cabin of the spaceship. The orc turned his eyes, and went straight to the main cabin. Li Ming in the main cabin could see clearly, but he couldn't care too much at the moment, and continued to operate the spaceship. The damaged spaceship naturally could not continue to transmit, and Li Ming immediately changed to flight mode. The spaceship turned and flew directly into the depths of the sky. The layout of each cabin of the spaceship was displayed on the console at this time, and a red dot was moving from other cabins to Li Ming's main cabin cage little by little. The original metal door and barrier could not stop the orc from approaching at all. The strong body directly tore the wall and metal door, even though the spaceship was still flying. Without the red barrier, the spaceship flew out of the big star and into the vacuum of the universe in just a few seconds. Due to the air pressure, the pressure inside the cabin is greater than that outside, which causes the things inside the cabin to be constantly sprayed out, and the damaged hull is also being torn apart crazily. In this way, the disintegration of the spaceship is inevitable. Li Ming frowned and continued to operate on the operating table. Just as he was about to operate something, the portal behind him suddenly flashed with light, and the orc actually came directly to the main cabin. Bang! The entire spaceship was instantly turned into fragments, just like a bomb exploded inside the spaceship. The spaceship was instantly torn into pieces, but the main cabin of the spaceship was intact, and continued to fly far away. This is exactly one of the abilities of the capsule spaceship, which decomposes all parts of the spaceship, and only keeps the main cabin intact. The main cabin is flying fast in the universe, without power, and completely relying on inertia to fly. At this time in the main cabin, Li Ming and the orc stood opposite each other. The orc clenched the bones in his hand, and looked at Li Ming coldly. Chapter 583 Bone Demon, Boils. You have completely angered the Bone Demon Boils, and you will pay the price of your life for this. The half-orc Boils said fiercely in a rough voice. Li Ming's expression tightened when he heard this. Go to hell. As soon as the roar fell, Boils swung the bone and smashed it directly at Li Ming. Seeing that the other party really launched an attack, Li Ming opened his eyes wide. This guy is absolutely crazy, Li Ming exclaimed. Boom. A violent sound was heard, and the entire cabin exploded directly. Li Ming had already predicted it. The surface of his body flashed with golden light, and a layer of golden shield had already wrapped Li Ming. Although he could stay in the vacuum of the universe, it would also consume a lot of energy. Glancing at Boils, Li Ming turned around, and the cloak behind him shook, and turned into a pair of silver white wings. It was the Zingian wing. With the wings flashing, Li Ming flew straight into the distance. Seeing this, Boils moved his body and actually chased after him. In the vast universe, there is no end in sight, but in order to get rid of Boils behind him, Li Ming can only speed up his flight. As long as we get rid of him, then, we can use the capsule spacecraft to get out. Li Ming whispered, and also increased his flying speed. The speed of the Zingian wing is extremely fast, but Boils, who has the second interval, seems to have some special flying ability, and his flying speed is not slower than Li Ming at all. This made Li Ming frown and worry. I can't get rid of this guy, Li Ming whispered secretly, but his heart was extremely tormented. Boils behind him was still gritting his teeth, as if he would never give up, until he killed Li Ming. The pursuit of the two was like two birds flying in the sky. Although the speed was the same, they still looked desperate, and did not dare to relax at all. Flying like this, a planet has entered Li Ming's field of vision. This is a dwarf planet, not large in size, with a bare surface and all rocks. As Li Ming saw, this planet was like an irregular metal flying in the universe, and its size seemed to be about the same as the moon. Looking back at Boils behind him, an idea came to Li Ming's mind. Since I can't get rid of him, let's challenge the strength of the second interval of the second level civilization. Thinking of this, Li Ming turned around and flew straight to the dwarf planet. Boils, who had been following Li Ming, also noticed Li Ming's movements. This scene seemed to be just what Boils wanted. The flight trajectory remained unchanged and followed Li Ming to the dwarf planet. After a few flashes, the surface of the dwarf planet suddenly made two loud booms, as if two bombs hit it, stirring up bursts of smoke. The smoke dissipated. Li Ming looked at the other party. His eyes suddenly opened, and his right hand raised, and a purple crystal block was taken out. Li Ming originally had a lot of purple crystal blocks, but because of the excessive amount of cyan water used in the last advancement, Li Ming could only rely on purple crystal blocks to advance. A large amount of use allowed Li Ming to successfully enter the second level civilization, but there were few purple crystal blocks left on his body. In his eyes, a cyan triangle pattern has emerged. Li Ming has used the 6 domains enhanced star. With this ability bonus, Li Ming's other abilities will increase. Coupled with the combination ability of a purple crystal block, Li Ming will naturally challenge the opponent. His body was wrapped in purple aura, and the triangle pattern in his eyes kept flashing. Boils looked at this, his expression slightly tensed, and whispered, although it is only a second level civilization, the energy aura is extraordinary. Li Ming's eyes slightly opened, and a light flashed in his right hand. A blue-white lightsaber has been formed, and his feet flew straight to Boils. Hey, come on. Boils shouted, and his body moved, and went straight to Li Ming. His eyes were locked on Li Ming tightly, and his mouth was gritting his teeth. The bones in his hands were ready to attack at any time, but at this moment, Li Ming in front of him suddenly disappeared with a bang. Boils frowned and his body paused. Before he could react, Li Ming behind him had already swung his sword and chopped it down. Bang! Li Ming's lightsaber slashed at Boils' neck, and the blow was about to cut off his head, but after a dull sound, Boils' head did not fall off, but his body flew out like a baseball. Li Ming's attack just now seemed to have just hit a baseball. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and Boils hit a rock in the distance. The rock instantly broke and shattered, turning into smoke and debris. The smoke blocked the vision, and Boils' figure was completely invisible. Li Ming Gage was surprised and looked in the direction of the smoke. Swoosh. A light sound was heard, and Li Ming's wisdom eyes caught a figure before the sound. The figure was too fast to see its true appearance. He could only see a long object flying over. Li Ming's eyes widened a little, and just as he had a hint of other thoughts in his mind, the object was already a few meters in front of Li Ming. Although there was a golden light shield on his body, Li Ming still picked up the lightsaber and moved forward. Pa-bang. The golden shield shattered like glass fragments in an instant, and at the same time, a harpoon-shaped bone blade directly pierced the light blade in Li Ming's palm. There were 3 thorns in front of the bone blade, each more than a foot long, basically the same as an ordinary fork, and Li Ming's light blade just blocked the gap between the 3 thorns. Although the light blade resisted the attack, the long bone thorn also pierced into Li Ming's body. Although it only penetrated an inch, it made Li Ming feel an unusual pain. His expression was tense and his eyes were focused. Despite this, Li Ming whispered in surprise, above. Boyle's figure had come to Li Ming's head at some point, and his palm turned into a fist and smashed down directly at Li Ming's head. Boom. The ground within 100 meters collapsed, and the smoke and rocks were shaken up several meters high. It was as if the ground of the entire area was crushed into pieces in an instant. Despite this, there was no deep pit on the ground, but it was slightly sunken, and the rocks were broken into pieces. The rocks that were shaken up fell back to the ground, and the smoke and dust in the rocks calmed down in the air. In the ruins, Boyle slowly stood up. The ground consumed by his fists was blank, and there was no sign of Li Ming. Boyle looked calm, raised his head slightly, and looked to the distance to the side, and said, "This moving speed should be the teleportation of intelligent civilization." As he spoke, he turned slightly, and looked at Li Ming in the distance. Li Ming also looked at Boyle intently, with a green light flashing slightly on his chest, and the ghost key was already treating the wound. He clenched his hands tightly, and the blue light on his body surface flashed slightly. He looked at Boyle in the distance indifferently, and the energy had begun to circulate on his body surface. Li Ming was still preparing, when Boyle suddenly moved, and with a bang, his body disappeared from the spot. He ran straight towards Li Ming with his right hand tightly holding the bone fork. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and suddenly clenched his right hand. At the same time, he leaned over and slapped the ground in front of him with his left hand. The sound of clattering continued to be heard, and the shattered rocks suddenly condensed and piled up into stone giants. As soon as the stone giants appeared, they waved their arms, and began to attack. These stone giants just appeared from the path of Boyle's attack. Boyle did not take them seriously at all. He flashed left and right, easily avoiding the stone giant's attacks, and directly waved his arms to cut off the ones that could not be avoided. The surface of the stone giant flashed with blue light, which was formed by Li Ming's energy gathering, but Boyle's bone fork seemed to be extremely hard, and it flashed red light when it was waved, which was extremely powerful. With 2 loud bangs, after the bone fork passed, the stone giant directly scattered and shattered, and turned into stones again, and fell to the ground. These methods were naturally unable to resist the opponent. The clenched right hand flashed green light at this moment, and then 3 vines grew out from the palm of his hand. These 3 vines were intertwined, just like 3 snakes entwined with each other. With this weaving, a 2-meter long vine blade had been formed. The top of the vine was slender and sharp, like the tip of a sword, while the root held by Li Ming was slightly thick, and wrapped around Li Ming's right hand and the entire right arm, as if there was a vine armor on his right arm. Chapter 584, Insufficient Energy. With both feet pushing the ground hard, a wave of air spread out, and Li Ming's figure shot out like an arrow. Bang bang bang, the vine blade and the opponent's bone fork collided instantly. The 2 weapons kept colliding, and close combat began immediately, but after only a moment of fighting, Li Ming rolled over and retreated to a distance, frowning. The strength of that bone weapon is extraordinary. Damn, then close combat becomes meaningless. Li Ming whispered to himself. Seeing Li Ming avoiding close combat, Boyle's expression changed, and he rushed towards Li Ming again. Li Ming narrowed his eyes, tightened his brows, and jumped to a distance. Boyle's flying figure suddenly disappeared with a bang. Seeing this, Li Ming seemed to think of something immediately, and turned back without hesitation and slashed, bang. Just as Li Ming thought, Boyle flashed and came behind Li Ming. Although he had predicted the opponent's moves in advance, his body still paused. The strange force of the bone fork pressed down like a mountain. Li Ming felt his body tightened, and his whole body fell down. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and Li Ming's body hit the ground heavily. Smoke, dust, and gravel flew up under the impact. Boyle did not hesitate at all. He moved again, and rushed directly to the smoke, but at the same time Boyle fell, a strong breath suddenly released from the smoke. The breath was not a shock wave or a phantom, but a kind of power that could directly capture people's hearts. It could not be seen nor touched, but it could make people feel fear from the heart. Dance of the sky. Swoosh, 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 green vines flew out from the dust and smoke. This vine was different from the previous ones. It was only as thick as an arm and had broad leaves. As soon as it appeared, it stretched out madly towards Boils. Boils was falling down at this moment, so he had no time to dodge. The poisonous vines immediately wrapped around his limbs and then his body. Hundreds of vines intertwined and grew back and forth, and in just a moment, Boils was tightly wrapped up, and even the corners of his clothes could not be exposed. The vines wrapped around Boils became tighter and tighter, and the vines continued to produce transparent liquids. These liquids had the function of clothing. The armor on the surface of Boils' body began to melt, and the palms and face without armor also began to be eroded by this liquid. At this time, the smoke on the ground had gradually dissipated, and Li Ming stood on the ground and looked up at the sky. At this time, the vines intertwined together were like a tree with a diameter of tens of meters. The vines continued to grow, but the speed had become very slow. Li Ming's figure also left the ground and floated into the air little by little. The trumpet creeper has a strong corrosive effect. It should be dead now. As his figure slowly rose, Li Ming whispered, "The artifact netting, the previous owner was from our orc civilization, but in your hands, you have really brought out a lot of its power." Boyle's voice was heard immediately, and the sound was as clear as if it echoed in the sky. When Li Ming heard this voice, his brows furrowed again. Bang! A bone spur pierced through the vine and headed straight for Li Ming's chest. Li Ming was shocked. He had never expected this, and the bone spur was too sudden. Li Ming didn't even have time to use the magic shield. Snap! He raised his right hand and grabbed the growing bone spur. Despite this, the bone spur still pierced Li Ming's chest. Li Ming's teeth were tightly clenched together, and both hands held the bone spur in front of him at the same time, preventing the bone spur from going deeper into the body. And Li Ming's body was constantly moving away under the push of the bone spur. Bang! A loud noise was heard, followed by a whoosh 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 sound that broke through the air, and bone spurs shot out from the vines one by one, like sharp swords heading straight for Li Ming. His eyebrows tightened, and his body suddenly turned over. The wound on his chest instantly widened, and Li Ming fell to the ground with blood gushing out of his chest. Although he forcibly broke away from the bone spurs that had pierced his body, the wound was instantly enlarged a bit. The bone spurs that sprang out later also fell into the air and were successfully avoided by Li Ming. With a light slap sound, his feet landed steadily on the rocks on the ground, but his chest was already bloody and bleeding. His left hand flashed green light and he immediately covered his chest. At this time, a figure in the sky was also slowly falling. It was Boils, who had escaped from the vines along with the bone spurs that had just sprung out. However, Boyle's situation was not optimistic at this time. After being corroded by the vines of Trumpet Creeper, only white bones remained in Boyle's hands. The armor on his body was completely melted, and his ribs were even exposed on his chest. Even his head had some bones exposed. Although his flesh was corroded, and a lot of bones were exposed, Boyle's did not seem to be affected too much. There was no trace of blood on the exposed bones, just white bones. Looking at each other intently, the purple halo on Li Ming's body had gradually faded and disappeared, and even the cyan triangle pattern in his eyes disappeared and returned to the original eyeballs. The energy consumption is too great. If we continue to fight. Li Ming looked worried. Boyles looked calm, looked at Li Ming coldly, and said, "The losses you cause the big star to suffer cannot be redeemed by your life. Killing you is just to give an explanation." As he spoke, he walked towards Li Ming. Li Ming still had a few Liu iron pills on him, but that kind of pill had little effect on a level 2 civilization. Li Ming was in a dangerous situation. He watched the other party approach him coldly. Li Ming's right hand had already tightly grasped the cloak behind him. Before the other party came close, Li Ming suddenly shook it hard. But a black object flew out quickly, like a black cloud, blocking Li Ming in front of him. The black tissue was in an irregular shape and floated back and forth in the air. It seemed to be just black smoke, but it was the micro worms in Li Ming Heng Yunshang. Boyles, who was about to approach Li Ming, suddenly stopped. "These are." He watched quietly, his expression changed slightly, his eyes widened a little, and said, "Micro worms." Li Ming waved his right hand, and the micro worms turned and rushed straight to the other party. The flying macro worms were like a floating black cloud. Although the speed was not fast, anyone who knew this thing would stay away from it. Boyles didn't dare to approach and leaped far away. Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief. Although the micro worms are powerful enough, they need to be deployed in large numbers. There are a large number of micro worms in Li Ming's Shang space, which are enough to crush any non-civilized creatures, but micro worms also have many disadvantages. The attack speed is slow and easy to dodge. At the same time, if they encounter an opponent with elemental abilities, they will be useless. At this time, Li Ming released these micro worms to block the opponent's continued attack, and Boyles, a half-orc, obviously recognized this thing. Seeing Boyles avoid far away, Li Ming quickly took a few Liu iron pills. Even if the effect is minimal, it can delay the weakness of the energy in the body. At the same time, a metal capsule was taken out with a palm. Li Ming's move immediately attracted Boyles' attention. His eyes were glazed, and his right hand was raised. Only the white bones of the palm began to overflow with white liquid. In just a moment, a white sphere appeared on Li Ming's palm, and then the body moved and flew towards Li Ming again. Li Ming originally intended to summon the capsule spaceship. After all, he had the micro worms to resist the other party. Now he could take this opportunity to leave this place. However, when he noticed Boyles' figure, Li Ming immediately stopped his actions. The black cloud of micro worms fluttered and blocked in front of Li Ming. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and a white bone directly broke through the micro worms and hit Li Ming's chest. It felt like someone hit his chest hard. Ah! A mouthful of blood spurted out of his mouth, and Li Ming's body flew out and fell heavily on the ground in the distance. Although this heavy blow was powerful, Li Ming's physique was also extraordinary. After all, Li Ming was also a person who had taken Luoyang down. Chapter 585 New Discovery. Li Ming endured the severe pain in his chest and slowly stood up from the ground. He looked up and saw a black cloud of macro worms wrapped around a piece of bone and was constantly devouring it. The huge bone was formed from the white liquid in Boyles' hand. Although the attack was successful, Boyles seemed to have paid a heavy price. The expression on his face was a little weak. The white liquid obviously consumed a lot of energy. Seeing this, Li Ming raised his right hand, but just as he raised his hand, Li Ming was suddenly startled. He looked at his right hand and found that the metal capsule had disappeared. Could it be just now? Li Ming suddenly remembered something. The moment he was hit by the bone just now, Li Ming's right hand loosened, and the metal capsule was lost. There was no need to worry about this now. A blue light flashed in his right hand, and another metal capsule emerged. At this time, the macro worms floated slowly. After devouring the bone, the black cloud of macro worms blocked Li Ming again. Although the macro worms moved slowly, their attack power was indeed extremely strong, and the macro worms had many disadvantages. Because the micro worms will continue to reproduce during the process of swallowing, once new micro worms appear, they will not be controlled by Li Ming. Li Ming can only try his best to control the flying insects from reproducing outside. Boyles saw the speed of swallowing the bone just now. The bone disappeared completely at a visible speed, so Boyles was also very afraid of the micro worms. He threw his right hand into the sky, and with a muffled sound of bang, the metal capsule turned into a spaceship. The sudden appearance of the spaceship startled Boyles, and he gritted his teeth and whispered, "Want to run?" After a whisper, Boyles' right hand immediately began to condense the white liquid again. Li Ming naturally saw the other party's thoughts. He shook his cloak with his right hand again, and another group of black micro worms swarmed out. Li Ming's figure flashed, turned into a blue light and directly entered the spaceship. As soon as Li Ming entered it, the spaceship flew directly to the distance, in one go, at a very fast speed. Of course, Li Ming had already injected his flying dragon into it in advance, so he could directly control the flight after his body entered. Watching Li Ming's spaceship go away, Boyle gnashed his teeth and looked unwilling, but the two micro worms in front of him had slowly floated over, like two black ghosts. Boyle's eyes turned, and immediately looked at the two micro worms, but at the same time, Boyle's eyes suddenly noticed something. A metal capsule was placed on the ground not far away. Li Ming drove the spaceship away from the dwarf planet quickly. This time he finally got rid of the other party, but now he is still in the Lapnum Galaxy, which is still a region ruled by the Orc civilization. It is naturally not easy to stay in such a place for a long time. The second largest galaxy cluster in the Centaurus cluster is the Lawnland Galaxy, which is also the closest large galaxy to Li Ming. If you want to cross the galaxy cluster to go farther, you can't do it without a space-time spaceship. At this time, Li Ming can only choose to enter the Lawnland Galaxy first, and then look for the possibility of getting a space-time spaceship. Only in this way can Li Ming leave the Centaurus cluster. Li Ming had the space map that Joel had given him, so the safe coordinates for transmission were not a problem. After locking the target area, Li Ming sat cross-legged quietly in the main cabin. Li Ming's physical energy was seriously lost, and he was also injured. After letting the spaceship transmit itself, Li Ming began to recuperate and replenish his energy. The only elixir suitable for the second level civilization was the Zingian pill. Li Ming had no way of knowing the refining method and materials of the elixir. Elixirs are often extremely scarce. After all, the rarity of alchemists is enough to prove this. Without the elixir, Li Ming could only rely on slowly absorbing energy from his body to replenish it. At this moment, in the distant local supercluster, there were two connected spaceships floating slowly at the edge of the Marcellus Galaxy group. The two spaceships were different. One was a rectangular shape, like a rectangular block floating in the universe. The surface was dark, with occasional light, and it was slightly blurred in the dark night sky. The other spaceship was disc-shaped, with a silvery surface. The color and appearance were somewhat common. The two spaceships were connected to each other, just like the docking of a space station. Although the appearance is strange, it looks like a hole at this moment. Inside one of the flying ships, two large teams are sitting at a table that is more than 10 meters long and wide. There are more than a dozen members on each side, and they are aliens from different civilizations. The skin of the aliens on one side is green-brown, with a horn on the forehead, and purple armor and cloaks on their bodies. Most of the more than 10 people are soldiers. Only one leader sits at the table, the representative of the Dulang civilization, Yahan. The aliens on the other side are also more uniform, with a silvery appearance, as if each alien is wearing a layer of silver body-shaping clothes. Except for two big eyes like light bulbs, the rest of the body is hidden under the clothes. These aliens are from the Pumi civilization, and the leader is Gripina. The Dulang civilization is the controller of the secondary civilization world of the supercluster, while the Pumi civilization is the controller of the Hydra Centauri supercluster. The two civilizations each control the scale of a galaxy cluster, and are truly advanced civilizations. After they sat down in their respective seats, Ahern raised his eyes slightly and asked first, "Are you ready to take action?" Gripina nodded slightly and replied, "According to the latest information, Delphin has been killed, but some of the information he has been handed over to another person, and this person has successfully escaped from the control of the Orcs. As long as we find this person, then we can obtain all the information about the Big Star and the Orcs, and the plan to eradicate the Orc civilization can begin." Gripina continued. Ahern's expression was lifted when he heard this, and he looked at Gripina intently and said, "Where is this person now?" Gripina did not respond immediately, but raised her hand and pointed at the void, and saw a blue light flashing, and a galaxy pattern had emerged. This galaxy pattern showed the Centaurus galaxy cluster. This is the Lapnum Galaxy and the Lawnland Galaxy. The last point where this person disappeared was between these two galaxies. If this person escaped from the Lapnum Galaxy, he would most likely enter the Lawnland Galaxy. Gripina said this and pointed her hand again. The blue star pattern only had the Lawnland Galaxy. Gripina then continued, "The Orcs should also be looking for this person now, so we must find this guy before the Orcs." Ahern looked at the blue galaxy pattern. His expression became solemn and whispered, "It's been so long, we can't have any accidents again. I will send someone to the Lawnland Galaxy immediately." Ahern said immediately. Gripina looked calm and said, "I have arranged for someone to go. In addition to this matter, there is another more important thing for this meeting with you." Ahern paused after hearing this, and seemed to realize what the other party was going to say. After taking a deep breath, he said, "Yes, that matter is more important to us." While speaking, Ahern suddenly showed a strange look. While talking here, Li Ming was flying in the spaceship in the universe. During the long flight, the energy in Li Ming's body had been restored, and the wounds were healed by the treatment of Ghost Key. He looked up at the operating table, and slowly stood up. When he came to the operating table, after looking around, Li Ming's eyes widened a little. There was still some distance from the Lawnland galaxy, but a huge cruise bay appeared on the operating table. This cruise bay was very different. It was not a space station type, but a planet type, and it was on a wandering planet. This was a cruise bay type that Li Ming had never seen before. If it weren't for the special mark on the space map, Li Ming would not have believed that this planet was a cruise bay. Touching his chin with one hand, Li Ming fell into thought, then raised his hand and pointed, confirming the coordinates, and was heading to the cruise bay. Chapter 586 Bernardo's Cruise Bay. Berna Cruise Bay Independent Cruise Bay is completely different from the cruise bay that Li Ming knew before. The previous cruise bay was like a chain store, formed by the docking of high-tech spacecraft technology, all from the same organization or force. But Independent Cruise Bay is like another brand among competitors, which is completely independent. The controller of Berna Cruise Bay is Rock Berna, whose origin and identity information are unknown, but he has been operating Cruise Bay for a long time. And this wandering planet is also named Berna Star, but most people prefer to call it Berna Cruise Bay. There are not many wandering planets that are suitable for living. Although there are a large number of wandering planets in the vast universe, they need to be accommodated. In addition to their huge size, these planets often have extremely strong geocentric heat. They are also high energy planets and have an atmosphere. The atmosphere is like a protective film that prevents the geocentric heat of the wandering planet from being dissipated, so that even if it is far away from the star, it will not become a frozen planet. Even so, the temperature of the planet is generally low. As for the surface environment of the planet, it is relatively harsh. Although there is life and water, there are no plants. Most of them are rock lakes, and deserts occasionally appear. As soon as the spacecraft approaches the cruise bay, it will receive traction information, which is basically the same as the ordinary cruise bay. Li Ming raised his hand and confirmed the landing information. Under the guidance of the ground, the spacecraft entered the planet Dao. The subsequent operations were no longer controlled by Li Ming, but the trajectory of the ground operation was still displayed on the console. The landing coordinates of the spacecraft were located in a place called Wufeng District. The terrain here is flat, and the desert is 100 miles in radius. The desert is calm except for the wind and sand. The center of the desert is a building area. The buildings are all cone-shaped, but not all cones. Some are square, with a wide bottom and a narrow top. 100 miles away from the entire building area is the parking place for the spacecraft. There are a total of 5 peaks on the periphery of the entire area, which is also the origin of the name of this place, Wufeng District. The peak where Li Ming's spacecraft is parked has gathered a large number of spacecraft. The spacecraft is parked in the air at the top of the peak, and in the middle and bottom of the peak are small aircraft. When parked, Li Ming saw a large number of aircraft shuttling back and forth between the peak and the building area, and a large number of spacecraft took off and landed in it. Some left, some landed, all kinds of people came one after another. As soon as Li Ming's spaceship landed, a flying machine came to the side of the spaceship. A blue light flashed, and Li Ming walked out of it. The flying machine was an unmanned flying machine. Li Ming stepped in and sat down directly. The flying machine started up by itself and flew directly to the construction area in the distance. At this time, the blue light on the control console of the flying machine was already flashing, and various information about the cruise bay emerged little by little. Seeing this information, Li Ming's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but whispered in surprise, "Alchemy." In addition to trading items, the cruise bay here can also trade intelligence information and refined pills. These are not available in other cruise bays. Li Ming understands the trading of items, and although he understands the meaning of trading intelligence information, he has not encountered it yet. As for alchemy, it is the first time that Li Ming has heard of it. Alchemy here means that there are customers who provide materials, and then the alchemists in the cruise bay will be responsible for refining the pills, with a 20% success rate and high fees. Li Ming has become somewhat interested in looking at this information and raised his hand and directly locked the alchemy service area. The aircraft turned in the direction indicated by Li Ming and flew towards a huge building. The buildings here are all hundreds of meters high, or even thousands of meters high, but the building that Li Ming is heading to is relatively low, only 100 meters high. It is not as high as other buildings, but it is very large in size. It is square at the bottom and semicircular at the top. There are also many aircraft parked at the door. Li Ming's aircraft also landed slowly. The hatch opened, and Li Ming walked out. At this time, many aliens came in and out of the door at the bottom of the building, and there were also orcs among them. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his wisdom ability was activated. While checking, Li Ming walked inside. The entrance is a wide portal. There are some second-level civilizations among the people coming in and out around it. Of course, most of them are still first-level civilizations. Li Ming's eyes entered it while looking around. All the people who come here need to refine elixirs. Of course, they can also buy elixirs directly, but the prices are extremely expensive. However, most of the elixirs here are Liuandan, which is still rare. Even if there are any, they are extremely expensive. Passing through the portal, the attack came to a wide hall. Through the information seen by the wisdom eye, Li Ming was already very familiar with the operation process here. The building of the hall is relatively old, all black rocks, like the naturally formed stone pillars in the cave. Although it looks bright and beautiful on the outside, it is not satisfactory inside. There are 3 huge screens in the room, and various information is displayed on the screen. There are elixirs for sale and elixir formulas. There is a portal under each screen, and the portal corresponds to the service content on the screen. Among the 3 screens, the right side has the most people, and they are all low-level civilizations. Secondly, the left side is mostly first-level civilizations, and there are only a few under the middle screen, and they are all second-level civilizations. Li Ming went directly to the bottom of the middle screen, and looked up at the screen. The formula of Zinga and pill. There are 3 kinds of pills on the screen, but Li Ming only pays attention to Zinga and pill. As for the other 2 pills, they are not of much value to Li Ming. The purchase price and formula of Zinga and pill are clearly displayed on the screen. Li Ming looked at it and walked towards the portal. After passing through the portal, Li Ming came to a separate small room, more than 10 square meters. There was a spring in the middle of the room, and a stone platform at the innermost. An alien sat on the stone platform with his eyes closed. This person is a second-level civilization. Just by taking a look, Li Ming found that this person is the alchemist here. Behind the alien is a grey cloak, and his face is old. Even though it is only a second-level civilization, it seems that he has stayed at this stage for a long time. Just as Li Ming's previous understanding of alchemists, they are already very old. The higher the civilization level of civilized creatures, the longer their lifespan will be. There are only 2 reasons that affect the length of life. One is physical aging, and the other is the consumption of original energy. The aging of the body is inevitable. Pure energy can reduce the aging speed of the body, but it will not stop the aging process. It is just longer. Compared with this, the impact of the original energy on life is more serious. The original energy is perfectly combined with the body. This combination makes life longer, but if the original energy is damaged and lacking, the aging of the body will be accelerated, and the lifespan will be reduced. The alchemist in front of him should have stayed in the second-level civilization for a long time because of alchemy. After Li Ming entered, he said nothing. His eyes just looked at the other party coldly, and some of the methods and means of alchemy in his mind were also seen by Li Ming. As far as the methods and means of alchemy are concerned, the alchemist is not worried about being stolen. After all, this thing mainly comes from the accumulation of experience. Without long-term training and experience, the success rate and the perfection of the elixir will be reduced. But for Li Ming, this obviously exists. He stared at the other party with his eyes widened a little, thinking, this alchemist is not simple. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 587. Garbage. The alchemist in front of him was an inherited alchemist of a civilized race. His home planet's civilization was a biological civilization, and he had been studying alchemy. However, after the war, the home planet civilization was plundered by other civilizations. This person followed Rockburner after being rescued, and he continued to make alchemy and serve Rockburner. The ancient alchemy technique made Li Ming's eyes light up, and looking at the other person's brain was like watching a movie. Li Ming's main purpose was to obtain the alchemy technique, and he didn't care too much about other contents. Do you want to make alchemy? Or do you want to buy elixirs? The alchemist opened his eyes slightly and finally spoke. Li Ming also reacted at this time. The alchemist stared at Li Ming and said, "I've been here for a while, tell me." Li Ming smiled slightly and replied, "Neither making alchemy nor buying elixirs, I just came in to take a look." With that, Li Ming turned around and walked outside. The alchemist immediately showed an unhappy look. Li Ming paused and stopped when he heard this. "You can't just come in and go out as you please. If that were the case, my place would have been overcrowded a long time ago," the alchemist said coldly. Li Ming's brows tightened, and he slowly turned around, staring at the other party intently, and said, "What do you mean?" The alchemist chuckled twice and replied, "It's not what I mean, but the rule of Bernard Cruz Bay. You either buy pills or refine pills. In short, it won't work without some transactions." Li Ming snorted after hearing this, nodded slightly, and said, "Then, buy 2 pills." The alchemist nodded with satisfaction and said proudly, "That's right." While speaking, he raised his hand, took out a metal object, and looked at Li Ming. Li Ming naturally understood what the other party meant, but he did not mean to pay for the energy. Instead, he said, "I need to see the quality of the pills first. Even if you want to force me to buy something, you have to see the quality first." The alchemist's eyes widened a little when he heard this, and he looked unhappy. He said sternly, "Forced buying and selling? That's not what I said. You are probably here to cause trouble." Li Ming smiled lightly and said no more. He flipped his right hand and took out a star bag. He said, "I can't run away, and I have the energy I need to pay, but what if I'm not satisfied with your pills?" As he said this, Li Ming raised his hand and threw the star bag in his hand away. The alchemist took the star bag and sensed the items in the star bag. He immediately uttered a he sound and said, "In the entire Hydra Centaur supercluster, you can't find a better pill than this." As he said this, the alchemist also raised his hand and threw the metal box in his hand away. Li Ming took the metal box. He raised his hand to his chest, and a blue light flashed in his palm. The metal box opened, and 2 golden pills appeared. The surface of the pills was shining with golden light, and the energy aura was also spreading, which was fascinating. It was not a top grade pill, but it was also a top grade pill. Although Li Ming had not been refining pills for a long time, he was extremely experienced. When he saw the pills in front of him, Li Ming shook his head directly, sighed slightly, and whispered, "I knew. There are no good pills here. It's really disappointing." As he spoke, Li Ming turned around and walked out again. At this time, the alchemist suddenly stood up with a solemn expression and said coldly, "What do you mean by this?" Li Ming stood at the portal, snorted with disdain, and said, "It is obvious that this kind of rubbish pill is not worthy of me to take. You should keep it and sell it to others." As he said this, Li Ming raised his hand without looking back and threw the metal box behind him. After doing this, Li Ming walked towards the portal, but before Li Ming could leave, the alchemist suddenly moved, grabbed the metal box, and then flashed in front of Li Ming. He raised his head slightly, his old face was full of anger, his old eyes kept looking at Li Ming, his mouth slightly opened, and said, "Boy, I have been refining pills for a long time. You said my pills are rubbish. Are you looking down on me? I haven't seen a better pill than this," the alchemist said coldly. Li Ming snorted and said, "The pills I made are several times better than yours. Tell me, is yours rubbish?" "You." The alchemist was furious, with a ferocious expression on his face, as if he was going to kill Li Ming. His trembling lips kept revealing sharp teeth, and his hands were clenched into fists. Although angry, the alchemist seemed unable to take action directly. After taking a deep breath, He suppressed his anger and said as he took a breath, I have been an alchemist for so long, but this is the first time I heard someone say that my pills are not good. Since you call it garbage, and, from your tone, you can also make pills, that's fine. I have everything here, just show me. If the pill you make is indeed better than mine, I will return the energy you just paid to you, and even double the compensation to you. But if the pill you make is not as good as mine, At this point, the alchemist gritted his teeth fiercely, his expression suddenly became ferocious, and said, then I will hand you over to Lord Bernard for handling. Provoking trouble is no small matter in our Bernard Cruise Bay. Li Ming smiled slightly, looking nonchalant, and said, there is no need to return the energy. If the pill I make is not as good as yours, you can do whatever you want with it. But if the pill I make is worse than yours, then all the refined pills belong to me. Li Ming's confident look startled the alchemist. After hesitating for a while, he said, okay. The alchemist was full of confidence when he said this. He snorted coldly, and then he came to the innermost part of the room. He raised his hand and a portal appeared. Standing at the portal, the alchemist glanced behind him and thought to himself, how can the method of refining elixirs accumulated over tens of millions of years and the achievements of refining elixirs achieved after practicing day and night be surpassed by a young alchemist? Humph. With a move, the alchemist entered the portal. Li Ming did not hesitate at all and followed him in. After passing through the portal and coming to a larger room, Li Ming's eyes widened a little when he looked around. This was an alchemy room. Alchemy instruments and elixir materials were displayed in an orderly manner on all sides of the room. Looking around, Li Ming's eyes were also opened. The alchemy instruments here were all pure round metal balls, floating in the air one by one, like lamps. The alchemy materials were also displayed on the shelves, some in star bags, and some on the surface of the shelves. There were all kinds of materials. The alchemist walking in front glanced behind him slightly, and seeing Li Ming's surprised eyes, he couldn't help but chuckled twice and said, I have been making alchemy all my life. Looking at the entire Hydra Centaurus supercluster, no one can surpass me. I have met countless alchemists, but none as arrogant as you. Here are all kinds of alchemy tools and materials. You start. Li Ming was still surprised by the complete alchemy tools and materials here. Hearing what the other party said, he came back to his senses, pretended to be calm, and took a deep breath, and said, okay, then I will let you know what a real alchemy master is. Li Ming's tone was still extremely arrogant, which made the alchemist dissatisfied, but since he was here, he naturally wanted to see his true level. The alchemist didn't say much, just glanced at Li Ming coldly, and came to sit on the stone platform beside him. Li Ming glanced back and forth at the alchemy furnaces in the air, and immediately locked onto one of them. Then he narrowed his eyes, raised his hand and grabbed it, and the silver metal bowl floated over. This metal bowl looked like a sphere, but it was empty inside, and the metal bowl could also be flipped open, which was a carefully designed alchemy tool. The metal ball was about the same size as an ordinary basketball, with a smooth surface that flashed brightly, and a slight energy aura emanated from it. Li Ming's discerning eyes also selected this relatively good tool from among the many tools. Chapter 588, Perfection. After selecting the alchemy equipment, Li Ming turned his eyes to the place where the materials were placed, and then walked over slowly. With a discerning eye, Li Ming carefully selected and put all the materials of better quality into the equipment. For alchemy, every step and every material is crucial. Li Ming's careful selection is absolutely correct. The so-called good elixir is the extreme details that can be achieved in the refining process. The main way to refine this kind of energy replenishing elixir is to extract the energy from the material and then integrate it into the energy. The energy contained in these materials has its own effect, just like the formula of traditional Chinese medicine. The energy in the material gathers and condenses the newly invested energy to form an elixir. The higher the quality, the higher the purity of the elixir. The best elixir is the one without a trace of residue, and it can be perfectly absorbed after taking it. Of course, most alchemists may not be able to do it without taking in any residue when refining materials in their ultimate life. After placing the found materials in the metal ball, Li Ming came to the hall, looked at the alchemist with his eyes, smiled slightly, and said, then I will start. The alchemist snorted lightly, glanced at him with disdain, and did not respond. Li Ming then turned his eyes and looked at the metal ball in front of him. At the same time, his eyes widened slightly, and light flashed in his eyeballs, and a green triangular pattern had formed. The color change of the triangular pattern was related to Li Ming's strengthening of his own ability. Green represents Li Ming's biological civilization. Under this strengthening, the alchemy method obtained by Li Ming from the alchemist's consciousness was also strengthened to the maximum, which also made Li Ming's alchemy technique proficiency doubled. He aimed his right hand at the metal ball in front of him, and grabbed it hard, and the green ball slipped out of his hand. The metal ball flashed instantly, and spun rapidly on the spot. The sound of buzzing was endless, and the light was also flickering. The green light was like a big green hand constantly dragging the rotation of the metal ball. The alchemist next to him saw this. His eyes suddenly widened a few points, and even his sitting body could not help but stand up. This skilled technique, this guy. The alchemist's surprised eyes shifted from the alchemy equipment to Li Ming. It was obvious that Li Ming's skilled operation was extraordinary. Li Ming was operating here, and in the deep space of the universe, a capsule spaceship was flying rapidly. In the main cabin of the spaceship was Boyles. At this time, the part of his body exposed to the bones had been restored. Except for the broken armor, that could not be repaired, his flesh was actually intact. Looking at the operating table in front of him, Boyles kept operating and sending messages through the operating table. On the big star, 3 orcs and a bugman were urgently discussing something in the cave. 4 figures stood on 4 stone pillars, and in the middle of the 4 people was a bowl-shaped stone platform. Blue light flashed above the stone platform, and a huge blue light ball was showing various starry sky information. Nicole flapped his wings. His face was unusually solemn, and he looked around. After glancing at the other 3, he said, "Sneaking into the prison, destroying the defense system, and carrying intelligence out of the Lapnum galaxy. This series of actions doesn't seem so simple." While speaking, his eyes finally stopped on Fidelia. Fidelia in the shell was also shocked at this time, and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Ki, a member of the insect tribe, also rolled her eyes. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "Could it be that this was deliberately arranged by the Pumi civilization?" As soon as this sentence came out, the eyes of the other 3 immediately turned to him, and Fidelia was the first to refute. Impossible. The strong tone immediately denied Ki's guess, and continued, "This person was first discovered by Justina. If it was premeditated, why didn't Justina come to the big star? Why go through so much trouble? At the beginning, Justina wanted to bring the source back, but was violently resisted by the other party." Fidelia quickly added. Nicole also nodded, sighed deeply, and said, "Whether it was intentional or unintentional, the current situation is very unfavorable to us." Nicole fell into deep thought, showing a helpless look on his face, and then said, "We must respond immediately, otherwise, it will be too late." The other 3 seemed to understand Nicole's implication, but they were just thinking about it, as if they had no plan to deal with it. Ki looked at the 3 orcs in front of them and said, "Delphin gave the information to that guy, so our priority, should we find that guy first?" Nicole looked serious, his wings moved slightly, and his figure slowly flew into the air. "Warden Waldrow, you are responsible for transferring the source body to the Lawnland galaxy. Fidelia, you cooperate with Boyles to find the whereabouts of that guy." Nicole's expression was already tense and his face was extremely ugly. But Waldrow's huge body shook slightly when he heard this, showing a look of surprise, and said, "Has it come to the point of transferring the source body?" Nicole glanced at him coldly and said, "The defense system of the big star has been destroyed. It will take a long time to repair it. If the Jingpo civilization attacks at this time, we will be in big trouble." At this point, Nicole said again, "You don't have to transfer all of them. Just transfer the source bodies plundered from this galaxy group this time. For the rest of the source bodies, you can only trouble Kinu." At the end of his words, Nicole's eyes suddenly became tactful, and looked at Kinu who was standing aside. Kinu's expression became complicated when she heard this, but after thinking carefully, she immediately smiled and said, "The Orc civilization and our Zerg people are originally one family. At this time, we Zerg people are naturally happy to help." Kinu's answer made Nicole very satisfied, but Nicole also knew that the source body was urgently needed by both the orcs and the Zerg people. Even if it was used by the Zerg people, it would be better to give it to the Zerg people than to be taken away by civilized creatures. Walro looked worried at this time. After thinking for a while, he looked at Nicole and said, "It's no problem to transport this batch of source bodies to the Lowenland galaxy, but the situation there is complicated. What if?" Without waiting for the other party to finish, Nicole waved his hand and said, "If you encounter trouble, just deposit it with Rockbanner first. When necessary, you can trade it to Rockbanner. In short, you must minimize the loss." Waldro nodded and replied, "Understood." Nicole looked helpless, nodded slightly, and said, "Let's do it." At this moment, on Burner's cruise bay, Li Ming's alchemy had ended, and the metal ball stopped rotating. Li Ming looked at the metal ball in front of him, his face full of satisfaction, but he did not rush to open the alchemy equipment, but threw the metal ball to the alchemist. The alchemist looked astonished, his eyes kept looking at Li Ming. Then he took the metal ball in his hand, hesitated for a while, and then looked back at the metal ball in front of him. He slowly raised his left hand and gently stroked the metal ball. With a hum, silver light flashed, and the metal ball opened. As soon as a gap was opened, golden light was released from it, and a strong energy breath also came to his nose. After it was fully opened, the alchemist opened his eyes wide. His face was full of disbelief, and his eyes widened a little. Inside the metal ball, there was a golden pill, the Zingan pill. The appearance of this pill was not much different from the one made by the alchemist, but in addition to the golden light, the surface of the pill was crystal clear, as if it was transparent, which was the embodiment of the purity of energy. In addition, the aura of the pill was several times stronger than that of the alchemist, and it looked like a top-grade pill. This is actually... The alchemist hesitated for a long time, and couldn't say anything. He had been making pills all his life, but he had never seen such a perfect pill. Li Ming looked at the other person's expression, smiled lightly, and said, "Did you see it? This is a top-quality elixir. Compared with yours, you say. Is yours rubbish?" The alchemist looked at the elixir in the metal box, and then looked at Li Ming. At this moment, he no longer minded what Li Ming said, because the elixir in front of him was indeed extremely rare. Li Ming walked to the side of the alchemist and said coldly, "Except for the perfect elixir, what is your success rate?" This question sounded like a whisper, but the alchemist immediately understood what Li Ming meant. He turned his head to the side, stared at Li Ming with a pair of old eyes, and couldn't say a word for a long time with his trembling mouth. Chapter 589. Want to learn alchemy from me? Alchemists are well aware that the success rate of alchemy is not 100%. Any slight mistake will affect the quality of the pill, and failure is also common. Li Ming succeeded in one fell swoop, and the pill he refined was so perfect, which is extremely rare. At this time, Li Ming slowly raised his right hand, took out the Zingan pill from the metal box, and said, "The pill belongs to me, you should have no objection." The alchemist was no longer angry, but smiled slightly and said, "Of course there is no problem. After all, it was agreed before." Li Ming clenched his palm and put away the Zingan pill, then turned around and prepared to leave. Wait. Before Li Ming took 2 steps, the alchemist immediately stopped Li Ming. Li Ming paused, stopped in place, turned around and looked at the other party, and the alchemist's thoughts also entered Li Ming's mind. "What? Is there anything else?" Li Ming turned around and asked. The alchemist chuckled and said, "Although I'm conceited that no one can match my attainments in alchemy, after seeing your technique just now, I really want to humbly ask for your advice." Hearing this, Li Ming's mouth corners slightly raised, his face showed a proud look, and his eyes turned to look at the stone platform not far away. Li Ming only needed a glance, and the alchemist immediately understood what he was saying. He quickly stepped aside and said, "Please take a seat." Li Ming glanced at the other party, and then sat down in front of the stone platform. At this time, Li Ming had a proud look, and his eyes gently looked at the other party, and said, "Do you want to learn my alchemy method?" The alchemist chuckled, hesitated for a while, and said, "I have been refining pills for many years, and I'm constantly pursuing perfection in the method of refining pills, but after seeing your refining techniques and results, I still hope you can help improve my alchemy techniques." Li Ming was in control of any thoughts in the other party's mind, and this remark was exactly what the other party was thinking. Li Ming raised his hand and touched his chin, looking at the other party with contempt, and said, "Want to learn my alchemy skills? It's not impossible, but..." The alchemist immediately turned pale after hearing this, and after a chuckle, he said, "Don't worry, as long as you are willing to teach me, you can choose the materials here at will." Li Ming glanced at the places where the materials were placed and said, "I'm not interested in these materials. I think, how about this? I will teach you to make alchemy, but all the pills I make must belong to me." The alchemist paused after hearing this, but after a little thought, he said, "Okay, no problem." Hearing that the other party agreed so readily, Li Ming nodded with satisfaction. At this moment, in the Wufeng district of Veracruz Bay, in a tall building, two aliens were sitting in a room. Among them, one was Nuaya from the Earth Bath Organization, and the other was Cannonbone from the Sky Bath Organization. Both of them were wearing a black cloak that covered their bodies completely, with only their heads exposed. "Has Lord John not arrived yet?" Peogu asked first. Nuaya shook her head slightly, sighed softly, and replied, "There is no news about Lord John yet, but I did see Paget." Upon hearing the name, Peogu's eyes widened a little, his expression tensed, and he said, "Paget? The guy sent by the Pumi civilization?" Nuaya nodded slightly, and then said, "According to Lord Yahan's meaning, the two of us are mainly cooperating with Lord Joel to find the guy who obtained the information, and we will cooperate with the Pumi civilization, so Paget is not our enemy at the moment." Peogu nodded slightly, hesitated for a moment, and said, "I understand this, but we too know nothing about the information about the person we are looking for." Nuaya nodded slightly, looked at each other and said, "I know this. Since Lord Joel asked you and me to wait here first, there must be a reason for him, so we can just stay here for the time being." Peogu sighed softly, and could only nod helplessly. Large spaceships kept landing in the sky of Wufeng district. These spaceships landed on the tops of the 5 peaks. Although these spaceships were not from the same area, they also proved the geographical importance of Veracruz Bay. The rise and fall of spaceships, accompanied by the coming and going of people, seemed calm on the surface, as if everything was natural and harmonious, but if you look closely, you will find some abnormalities. At first, there were many kinds of spaceships, but now they have begun to become monotonous. They are either the Earth Grey spaceships of Dust Star or the Silver Round spaceships of Pumi civilization. Of course, there are also square black spaceships from Dulang civilization. Among the many spaceships, these 3 types of spaceships are the most. Although there are many other spaceships coming and going, these 3 types of spaceships basically do not leave after they are parked. The parking or departure of spaceships here is under the control of Veracruz Bay. This is the basic system capability of Cruz Bay, which records the entry or departure of all spaceships. On the top of an independent peak in Cruz Bay, there is a circular building. This peak is not a peak in Wufeng district, but an independent peak in another place. The spherical building on the top is completely circular, like a big ball on top of a mountain. Inside the building, 2 aliens stood in front of a huge operating table and watched quietly. At this time, the operating table was showing the takeoff and landing of spacecraft in various regions. Among the 2 aliens, the leading alien was more than 4 meters tall and slender, like a person made up of several bamboo poles. Behind him was a long cloak, which was also green. It not only completely covered his back, but also dragged the ground. This person was Rockburner, the owner of Veracruz Bay. Next to him was an alien who was only more than 1 meter tall. Although he was not tall, his momentum was no less than that of Rockburner next to him. Rockburn looked at the operating table intently, raised his hand and lightly clicked, and an area on the operating table was instantly enlarged, which was the Wufeng district. The enlarged Wufeng district clearly showed the building area and the 5 peaks, and at the same time, the parked spacecrafts were also in full view. Just a rough glance, Rockburner frowned slightly. After a casual glance, he whispered, "Orcs, Pumi civilization, Dulang civilization, all gathered here." Having said this, he turned his eyes and looked at the person next to him, saying, "Hansji, the opportunity we, Dark Technology Civilization, have been waiting for seems to be coming soon." Hansji looked at the situation in front of him, not very concerned, but glanced at Rockbunner and said, I promised to help you. I will definitely do it. But what did you promise me? Rockbunner's mouth corners slightly raised when he heard this, and said, don't worry, I will definitely do what I promised you. There are only 2 people left in your Bihang civilization now, and I will let this civilization continue no matter what. But don't mention this now. After I succeed, the era of dark technology civilization has arrived, and your little thing will definitely be handled properly. Rockbunner continued. Hansji was relieved when he heard this. Rockbunner continued to look at the Wufeng district and said, now the war is just a cloud of smoke. What we have to do is to ignite this war and let it burn fiercely. Only in this way can our chance come. Hansji turned his head to look at Rockbunner, and after thinking for a while, he asked, what are you going to do? Rockbunner continued to stare at the operating table, smiled slightly, and said, don't worry, the time is not ripe yet. Let's wait and see. They will come to us on their own. At that time, it will be our chance. As he spoke, an evil smile appeared on his face. The Wufeng district is already far away from major forces, and many second-level civilizations have settled in it. At this moment, Li Ming is still happily refining pills at the alchemist. Although Li Ming agreed to teach the alchemist how to make pills, real alchemy requires the accumulation of experience and technology, and even if you are very skilled, it is impossible to be 100% successful in refining top-grade pills. Because in this kind of operation, mistakes are inevitable, but Li Ming is very different from them. Li Ming, who has the 6th domain enhanced star, not only has mastered the skills of alchemy, but can also operate repeatedly, making Li Ming's alchemy ability extremely powerful, and there is no such thing as mistakes. Simply put, ordinary alchemists will fail to refine top-grade elixirs because of a little mistake in the spirit or consciousness level. This is the only mistake that alchemists can make. But for Li Ming, that kind of mistake does not exist. Li Ming has a strong mental ability, so the success rate is always 100%. Chapter 590 Abnormal. Li Ming made a slight change to the formula of the pill when refining it. The ordinary Xinjiang pill uses the power of Xinjiang, while Li Ming uses the water of Xi'an. The pills refined by this natural energy that transcends ordinary energy are naturally extraordinary. In addition, Li Ming also tried to use other special energies in his body to refine. Of course, Li Ming only refined 1 or 2 of the other energies, and most of them still use the energy of Xi'an water. The refining of a large number of pills allowed Li Ming to accumulate many Xinjiang pills, which invisibly got rid of the factor of Li Ming's lack of energy in future battles. The alchemist also made some progress under Li Ming's guidance, but it was naturally far from enough to reach Li Ming's level. In the room, the alchemist kept trying, and Li Ming just sat quietly aside. At this time, Li Ming was already thinking about whether to leave here. After all, this alchemy also took a long time here. The alchemist had just finished refining a pill, and immediately came over excitedly, put the pill in front of Li Ming, and said, look, the pill I refined has been greatly improved. As he said this, the alchemist's face was full of excitement, like a child, but it also highlighted his obsession with the pill. I can improve thanks to your help. As he said this, the alchemist looked at the pill in his hand, and he was already extremely excited, as if he had achieved a great achievement. Li Ming glanced at the pill casually. Compared with the alchemist's previous method, the quality of the pill was indeed improved. However, Li Ming's mind was no longer on alchemy. After a slight smile, he said, it has indeed improved a lot. As long as you study hard and practice hard, you will definitely reach a higher level in the future. The alchemist laughed repeatedly upon hearing this and said, I'll have to rely on you for help in the future. Li Ming hurriedly shook his head and waved his hands, stood up, and said, no, in the future, it's all up to you. Huh. The alchemist's face suddenly changed. He looked Li Ming up and down. After hesitating for a moment, he said, what do you mean by this? You don't plan to teach me? Li Ming took a deep breath and said, I have already told you everything I can tell you. In the future, you can only practice more by yourself. I'm not from your Bernard Cruz Bay, and I have other things to do, so Without waiting for Li Ming to finish, the alchemist immediately raised his hand to stop Li Ming, his eyes showing a fierce look, and said, "You want to leave?" Li Ming turned around and knew what he was thinking just by looking at him, but still said, "Of course, can I stay here forever?" The alchemist was already showing displeasure at this time, looking at Li Ming coldly, and said, "You can't leave. The pills I refine are not as good as yours. After you leave, my alchemy skills will no longer be the best." Li Ming naturally understood what the other party was thinking, and hurriedly said, "In the entire Hydra Centaurus supercluster, you are still the #1 alchemist. If I wanted to compete with you for this title, wouldn't I have become the #1 long ago? Why would I wait until today?" After hearing what Li Ming said, the alchemist was suddenly stunned, as if what Li Ming said just now made some sense. Li Ming continued, "With my alchemy skills, no major power can refuse me, and you are still the #1 alchemist. This means that I don't want to be the #1 alchemist, nor do I want to serve others, so you can rest assured. With your current alchemy skills, no one should be able to surpass you." The alchemist's serious expression had eased when he heard this. As Li Ming said, it would be easy for Li Ming to get this title. In this way, he can be a little relieved. The alchemist looked at Li Ming intently. Although the anger had disappeared, he still cared about Li Ming in his eyes, but he didn't show it at the moment. He just looked at Li Ming quietly, thought for a while, and said, "What you said does make some sense. In this case, then you can go." Li Ming looked at the other party with his eyes. Although the other party didn't want to let Li Ming leave just like that, it was obvious that the other party had no intention of forcing Li Ming for the time being. After hearing what the other party said, Li Ming naturally didn't stay any longer. He turned around and left directly from the portal. Watching Li Ming disappear in the portal, the alchemist's eyebrows twitched slightly, and he fell into deep thought again, pacing back and forth. As long as this person is alive, I, the #1 alchemist, may be replaced by someone else at any time. So, thinking in his mind, an evil expression appeared on his face, and he snorted coldly. Leaving the alchemy trading building, Li Ming stood on the street in the construction area. He had been in there for quite a while, and the Wufeng district was not as lively as before. There seemed to be fewer pedestrians on the street. Li Ming looked around, locked onto one of the buildings, and then walked over. Li Ming didn't care too much about the scene on the street. After all, the cruise bay was like a market. There might be a lot of people suddenly, or there might be a few people suddenly. These were all natural phenomena, so there was no need to make a fuss. The building that Li Ming chose was a temporary residential building, just like a hotel. The entrance of this building was also very deserted, with few people coming in and out. This was completely different from the scene when Li Ming first arrived here. When Li Ming first arrived here, it was very lively, with people walking back and forth on the streets and in various buildings. There was a portal at the bottom of the building, and Li Ming entered it in a flash. When the light flashed again, Li Ming had already arrived at the lobby of the building. There was no one operating here. There was a service desk in the corner of the lobby. As long as you paid energy, you could choose the room you live in. Li Ming walked quickly to the service desk, raised his hand, and a blue phantom pattern had emerged, which was the prompt for room selection. But Li Ming frowned and took a deep breath after just a casual look. The entire residential building was actually full. A building type suddenly appeared in the blue light. The rooms that could be used for living in the building were already flashing with light, which meant that someone was already living there. After a careful look, Li Ming finally found an empty room in this 1,000-meter high building. At this time, it was no longer a question of choosing a room, but there was only one room. Li Ming frowned and didn't know why, but he couldn't care too much at the moment, so he decided on the only remaining room. He took out a star bag and put the energy into it. A portal lit up not far from the hall, and Li Ming turned around and entered the portal. When Li Ming appeared again, he was already in a room. This room was not big. There was an independent small room and a place similar to a living room outside. The edge of the living room was not a wall, but a transparent window. Li Ming just glanced out of the window and frowned. The location where the attacker lived was the high-rise of this building. From Li Ming's height, he could directly see half of the building area. There were few aircraft flying back and forth in the misty sky, as if Wufeng district had suddenly become silent. Looking at the surrounding buildings and the pedestrians on the street, the once vibrant cruise bay has become extremely depressed at this moment. Isn't this not normal? Li Ming narrowed his eyes and frowned slightly. After looking out the window and thinking for a while, Li Ming turned around and walked towards the independent small room. The small room was an absolutely closed area, completely isolated from the outside, and there was not even a window. Li Ming closed the door of the room, sat cross-legged on the ground, and the blue light on his body flashed. The energy breath spread out, and then he raised his right hand gently. The green light on his palm jumped, and a small green dragon appeared. The green dragon turned in Li Ming's palm, and then shot out, directly sinking into the wall and disappearing. The entire residential building was already full, but there were few people on the street and in the air. This abnormal phenomenon Li Ming had to let Filan go to see what was going on, because it was too quiet and a little abnormal. The green dragon began to wander around the entire building, and a strange scene soon appeared. There were people in these occupied rooms in the building, as if these people came all the way to the parade bay just to live. Chapter 591. So that's what happened. At the top of an independent mountain, in a huge spherical building, Rockbunner stood at the window and looked at the desolate planet in the distance and said, "According to what you mean, we have to kill this person?" Standing behind Rockbunner was the alchemist, who raised his eyes slightly and said, "This person is arrogant and proud. Although he has the powerful ability to refine pills, he cannot be used by our cruise bay. If he serves others, our trade in pills will inevitably be affected." Rockbunner nodded slightly, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. After a slight sigh, he said, "The killing of people in cruise bay still has a great impact on our reputation, but the trade in pills cannot be affected by others. You go and inform Hans G, and he will handle this matter." The alchemist heard this and raised his mouth slightly. After a strange smile, he turned and left. Rockbunner kept looking into the distance without looking back, and at this moment, a faint light on his wrist lit up, and a message came. Rockbunner raised his wrist and glanced at it, frowning slightly, and muttered to himself, "Waldro?" Looking at the information, Rockbunner hummed softly and turned to walk outside. Passing through the portal in the room, Rockbunner came to a corridor and walked to the end of the corridor. There was another portal at the end. Rockbunner flashed and entered it. When he appeared again, he was already in a wide room. At this time, there was already an orc waiting in the room. This orc was tall, with a lower body like a shrimp tail and tentacles around his waist like sharp blades. He was the source body warden of the big star, Waldro. As soon as he saw him, Rockbunner smiled slightly, came to the table in the room and sat down, and said, "Warden Waldro, you are really a rare guest." Waldro looked serious and said, "I have a batch of source bodies to sell to you now. Name a price." Waldro looked anxious, but Rockbunner was shocked. After re-examining him, he said, "The last time you sold source bodies was a long time ago. I was really caught off guard when I heard you say that." Waldro looked at him coldly and said, "To tell you the truth, this batch of source bodies was intended to be sent to the Lawnland Galaxy, but it was blocked by the Jingpo civilization on the way, and it might also encounter the Jingpo civilization when returning to the big star. To be on the safe side, I contacted the headquarters and planned to sell this batch of source bodies to you." Rockbunner smiled slightly when he heard this, took a deep breath, and said, "It's not convenient for me to store so many people here now." Waldro's face changed when he heard this. He looked at the other party intently and said, "So, you don't plan to buy this batch of source bodies?" Rockbunner smiled slightly and said, "Of course it's unlikely to buy, but I have an idea that you can consider. Now my cruise bay 5 Peaks district is full of people. It's better to auction these source bodies and get half of the proceeds. What do you think?" Waldro fell into deep thought after hearing this. After a moment, he replied, "Okay." Rockbunner smiled again and said, "Then just hand over the people, and I will arrange the rest." While talking here, Li Ming slowly opened his eyes in his room and frowned slightly. "Looking for someone who has information about the big star? Isn't that me?" Li Ming said to himself. But after thinking carefully, Li Ming frowned again, took a breath, and whispered in confusion, "It shouldn't be. Only Warden Waldro knew that Delphine gave me the information." The people here have nothing to do with the orc civilization. Li Ming had a puzzled expression on his face and couldn't figure it out for a while. In the building where Li Ming lived, a large number of Pumi civilization and Dulang civilization appeared. Through Filong, he learned that these two civilizations came here to find information about Dasta. In short, it seems that these people know that the holder of the information is in Cruz Bay, but these people don't know that Li Ming is the guy who holds the information. Only Waldro knows this secret. As a half-orc, Waldro couldn't tell the Pumi civilization and Dulang civilization about this matter. After all, these two civilizations have been trying to get this information. How did this matter leak out? Li Ming couldn't figure it out for a while. Just when Li Ming was puzzled, the operating table in the room suddenly buzzed and displayed a message. Li Ming turned his eyes, stood up and walked over. After seeing the message, Li Ming couldn't help but touch his chin. Message: there is a problem with the parking position of your spacecraft. Please go there in time to deal with it. Information source: Cruz Bay headquarters. The content of this message made Li Ming feel a little puzzled. Li Ming had never encountered such a problem. Looking at the operating table, Li Ming began to think. After just a little thought, Li Ming shook his head and walked outside. After all, this cruise bay is the middle platform. Since there is a problem, Li Ming will go over to see what is going on. There is no need to be suspicious. Passing through the portal, Li Ming came to the door of the building. The street was still sparsely populated, but a flying machine had been parked at the door. It was arranged by the system before. Li Ming stood up and sat on it, and the rest was left to the aircraft to fly on its own. Leaving the construction area, the aircraft soon entered the desert. The edge of the desert was the 5 huge peaks, located in different directions, but the mountains were of different sizes and shapes, so it was easy to distinguish. Li Ming looked around in the aircraft and noticed the mountain where he parked the aircraft. At first, the aircraft was indeed heading for the mountain, but halfway through the flight, the aircraft suddenly changed direction and moved to another place. Li Ming was originally relaxed, but after noticing the change in the flight trajectory, Li Ming immediately became cautious, narrowed his eyes slightly, and released his mental power, looking at the aircraft control console. Under Li Ming's mental power, the system settings of the console immediately entered Li Ming's mind. The final destination of the aircraft was not the place where the spacecraft was parked, but a place outside the Wufeng district. Seeing this information, Li Ming frowned slightly, his eyes moved slightly, and he began to think. At this moment, in a huge meteorite crater far outside the Wufeng district, an alien was already waiting quietly on a rock. This person was Hansuji, but his body was looming on the rock, as if he could merge with the rock under him. After a moment, Hansuji opened his eyes slightly and looked up at the sky in the distance, only to see a flying machine coming over the crater. The entire crater is far away from the Wufeng district, more than 10 kilometers long and wide, like a natural big bowl, with scattered rocks and depressions everywhere in the crater, and occasionally small pools and lakes. The rocks are all grey, like the color left after coal is burned, and the water in the pool is also colorful and turbid. At the same time, there are piles of garbage scattered everywhere in the crater. These garbage are naturally produced by the cruise bay. They are either abandoned and dilapidated spacecraft or various decorations. Once the energy of the decorations is exhausted or damaged, they will become garbage and be discarded. The whole environment is in a mess, like a natural garbage dump. After the aircraft came over this place, it immediately locked onto a piece of open space and then slowly landed. However, after the aircraft landed, there was no movement, just motionless in the same place. Hansuji glanced at the aircraft not far away, slowly stood up and flew over. When approaching the aircraft, Hansuji suddenly paused and frowned slightly. A surprised expression appeared on his face, and Hansuji hurriedly looked around. There was no one in the aircraft. When he turned his eyes, there was no one around, which made Hansuji's face change slightly. But at the edge of the pit, there was a figure standing. It was Li Ming. It was just that the distance was too far, and they could not see each other, but Li Ming's flying dragon was already in the aircraft. Li Ming looked at the distance intently, and his body moved slightly, floating towards Hansuji's position, his face full of interest. Chapter 592 Persuasion. Li Ming slowly came to the sky above this area, staring at Hansuji on the ground, and then slowly landed. Hansuji naturally discovered Li Ming and kept looking him up and down. Hansuji was a 2.3 level civilization, and Li Ming had seen a lot of information from his consciousness, which was why Li Ming came closer. His feet slowly landed on the ground. Li Ming looked at the other party quietly, smiled slightly, and said, "Seeing you, I finally understand what is going on now. You are just the right time." Li Ming's natural look surprised Hansuji, and he said coldly, "Although I don't understand what you are saying, there is one thing I know very well, that is, your death is coming." As soon as the voice fell, Hansuji moved, and at the same time as the body moved, his right hand turned from the waist, and a 2-foot short blade was already in his hand. This short blade flashed with silver light, and looked extremely sharp. As soon as he made a move, he aimed at Li Ming's neck and slid. Dang. With a crisp sound, Li Ming's right hand extended, and a hook sickle was swung out from his hand. The hook sickle was the magic weapon of the universe, Kai-Ngui. Kai-Ngui could transform from virtual to real, and at this moment it was in a physical state, and it also blocked the opponent's short blade. The curved blade of Kai-Ngui's hook sickle was more than 1 meter long, but the handle was only 2 feet long, which looked very strange. The most important thing was that there was a purple chain connected to the end of the handle. Li Ming held the handle of Kai-Ngui in his right hand, and the chain was in Li Ming's sleeve. The curved blade and Hansuji's short blade suppressed each other at this moment, as if the two were competing in strength. Hansuji looked at the curved blade in Li Ming's hand with a strange look in his eyes. After all, the breath of Kai-Ngui's curved blade was also different. "It's too hasty to attack me, because of the alchemist," Li Ming said lightly. Hansuji pushed hard with his hand, and his figure retreated more than 10 meters away. Hansuji's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Li Ming with wide eyes, and said in surprise, "You are spiritual civilization?" Li Ming smiled slightly and continued, "As you said, I already know everything you know." After hearing this, Hansuji gritted his teeth tightly, stared at Li Ming with his eyes, and whispered, "If that's the case, then you're even more dead." As soon as the voice fell, Hansuji's right hand clenched the short blade tightly, and his body moved, and flew out again, heading straight for Li Ming. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and had already seen through the other party's intentions. He then swung the sickle in his right hand. Dang dang dang, the sound of metal collision continued to be heard, and the sparks of the rising sun collision flew everywhere. The two began to fight in close combat. Although the other party was a 2.3 level civilization, the energy volume in Li Ming's body was not weaker than that of the other party. The wisdom I could clearly see the other party's attack intentions and targets, which made Li Ming very relaxed in dealing with it. "All your attacks are under my control. Even if your civilization level is higher than mine, you can't defeat me in the same range." Not only that, at this point, Li Ming suddenly dodged and teleported behind the opponent while avoiding the opponent's attack. However, Li Ming did not attack immediately, but stood quietly behind the opponent and said, "I can still kill you easily." Hansuji's eyes widened. Li Ming in front of him had been behind him without knowing when. If Li Ming took advantage of the time he was talking to attack, Hansuji might be either dead or injured. He suddenly moved, ignoring Li Ming behind him, and rushed forward more than 10 meters away. After making sure he was away from Li Ming, he turned around and looked at Li Ming. Li Ming just held the sickle in his hand, looked at the other party coldly, and said, "You belong to Bihuang civilization. For the revival of your civilization, you need to rescue another member of Bihuang civilization, Luo Zhaoyang, and then, you will surrender to Rokbana." Listening to what Li Ming said, Hansuji suddenly became more angry and said viciously, "You are a second level civilization. You don't know the power of 2.3 level civilization." As he said this, his right hand suddenly retracted and put the short blade back to his waist. At the same time, the surface of his body began to emit a gray-yellow dim light, as if his surface was flying yellow sand. Then he raised his right hand, and the yellow sand dim light condensed in his palm. The light flowed and turned in Hansuji's palm, as if it was a ball of liquid. "In this area, you will see death," he said viciously, and suddenly leaned over. His right hand slammed on the ground, and there was a dull sound of bang, and the gray-yellow light turned into circles of ripples and spread out from his palm. But The earth shook slightly, and the grey-yellow ripples spread far away along the ground. Li Ming's eyes could even clearly see the energy ripples flashing past his feet. The ripples continued to spread far away, until they disappeared from sight, as if covering the entire meteorite crater. Li Ming's expression was still calm, his eyebrows slightly tightened, and he whispered, "The energy in the earth are fused. It is somewhat similar to my energy control, but his energy can only fuse the earth." Li Ming was thinking secretly, and Hansji on the opposite side had stood up, looking at Li Ming coldly, snorted, and said, "Now, it's time to end." He shouted loudly, pointed his right hand at Li Ming, and grabbed the air. A breath of energy from the ground immediately emerged. Li Ming turned his eyes to look at his feet, and his figure suddenly jumped up, but just as Li Ming stood up, the soil under his feet flew up, and a huge arm formed by the soil grabbed straight into the air. Without waiting for the mud hand to approach, Li Ming flew away again, but at the same time, several big hands began to swoosh out from the ground, and these mud-formed hands grabbed Li Ming one after another. Li Ming easily jumped to avoid them. Although the opponent's attack density was extremely strong, under Li Ming's mental consciousness, he still couldn't succeed, and couldn't even touch the corner of Li Ming's clothes. One of the main reasons is that the attack speed of these mud hands is slow, and the energy control is also extremely weak. Your consciousness has not reached the level of control of this kind of power. Your mental power isn't sufficient to control the mud, and the attack speed is very slow. Speaking of this, Li Ming's figure has avoided all the mud hands, and after a few jumps, he came to the opposite side of Hansji. Hansji became even more angry after hearing these words, gritted his teeth tightly, and suddenly grabbed Li Ming with both hands at the same time. All the mud hands that Li Ming had avoided before suddenly pounced on Li Ming. A series of bang, bang, bang sounds were heard, as if a bunch of mud was overlapping and slamming into one place. The mud hands were hitting Li Ming one after another. After many hands fell, Li Ming's figure disappeared, leaving only a pile of dust flying around. Hansji looked at the mud that was almost piled up into a mountain, took a few deep breaths, and whispered, "This time, he should be dead." As he was saying this, he suddenly felt a chill on his shoulder. Li Ming's sickle had been quietly placed on his shoulder. Hansji's body froze, and he stayed where he was, not daring to move at all. With a trembling mouth, he stammered, "You, when?" Li Ming just looked at the other's back with contempt, expressionless, and said, "The reason why I didn't kill you is because I don't want a civilization to disappear in my hands. Of course, there is another reason. That is a secret about the Bihang civilization." Hearing this, Hansji's face suddenly changed, and beads of sweat quietly flowed down his forehead. He turned his eyes behind him and said, "You saw that thing?" Li Ming snorted lightly and said, "You surrendered to Rockbana and asked him to help you rescue Luo Zhaoyang. Wasn't it for that thing?" Hansji's expression suddenly became serious, and he said, "It originally belonged to our race. I got it to restore the Bihang civilization. Even if I die, I will not let it fall into the hands of outsiders." As soon as the voice fell, the land behind Hansji suddenly bang jumped out of a big rock hand and pushed Li Ming into the air. The huge rock hand rose from under Li Ming's feet, just like Li Ming was stepping on a high-speed elevator, and rose into the sky in an instant. Li Ming was also shocked. Chapter 593, Return to your home planet. Hansji turned around abruptly, looking at the rock arm still rising from the ground, and suddenly raised his hand and squeezed it hard. The rock hand that pushed Li Ming up also squeezed it, as if it was going to squeeze Li Ming into a pulp. But at the moment, when the rock hand was about to squeeze, a blue energy burst out from Li Ming's body, and the rock hand stopped, just as it was about to squeeze. The trembling fingers continued to exert force, but like a big hand holding a piece of iron, it could no longer squeeze it a little bit. The blue energy phantom released by Li Ming's body was exactly what stopped the movement of the rock hand. Hansji was also controlling the rock hand on the ground at this moment, but he could not move forward at all. Li Ming's expression was still calm, and his slightly narrowed eyes suddenly opened, and the blue phantom energy spread out, igniting the entire rock hand like a flame. The flame burned quickly along the arm of the rock hand. In just a blink of an eye, the entire rock hand was controlled by Li Ming. Hansji also clearly sensed the change in energy. He looked up and said to himself, my energy is covered. Li Ming jumped down from the rock hand and raised his sickle high to smash Hansuji below. Seeing Li Ming's momentum, Hansuji dared not take it head on and turned over and jumped back to a distance. Boom. A deafening sound was heard. The earth trembled slightly and Li Ming's falling body was like a cannonball falling. Dust and smoke flew, rocks rose up, and a big pit appeared. When the dust and smoke dissipated, Li Ming slowly walked out of it, looking at Hansuji with his eyes. You clearly know that Rockburner is promoting the outbreak of war. Not only did you not stop it, but you also became his helper. Do you know that this will also completely destroy your Bihang civilization? Li Ming stopped and said. Hansuji looked at Li Ming angrily. As a second level civilization, Li Ming's strength has reached the second interval of the second level civilization. As the top of the first interval of the second level civilization, Hansuji felt extremely difficult and even felt that he was just a plaything in the hands of the other party, as if the other party could really kill him at any time. On the one hand, there was a gap in strength, and on the other hand, Li Ming already knew all the secrets that Hansuji knew, and this was the most terrifying. But even so, Hansuji had no way to deal with Li Ming. Li Ming slowly approached Hansuji and continued, in fact, you know very well that as a dark technology civilization, Rockburner promotes the purpose of fighting, which is to make all forces lose, and then the army of the dark technology civilization will take advantage of the opportunity to enter. The result is that the dark technology civilization rules everything here. At that time, you, the orphan of the Bihang civilization who has no use value, will only have a dead end. Listening to what Li Ming said, Hansuji's expression changed accordingly. After all, what Li Ming said was somewhat reasonable. Li Ming continued to walk and said, give up Rockburner. I can help you achieve your goal. Hansuji looked at Li Ming who was getting closer and closer to him. He clenched his right hand and a pale yellow light formed in his palm. But just when Hansuji was about to use some means, Li Ming's figure suddenly disappeared with a buzz. When Li Ming appeared again, he was already behind Hansuji. The difference from before was that Li Ming's sickle had hooked into the opponent's body, but the sickle was already in a phantom state. The phantom sickle directly hooked the opponent's soul, which made Hansuji unable to use the energy in his body. His whole body trembled, as if the vital parts of his body were caught by the opponent, and he could not use energy, and might die at any time. Li Ming stood behind Hansuji, holding a purple chain in his hand, and the sickle had already entered the opponent's body. Go back to your home planet. If Luo Zhaoyang is still alive, I will bring her back to your home planet for you. You shouldn't participate in this battle. Li Ming continued. Under Li Ming's control, Hansuji finally calmed down. Apart from listening to Li Ming quietly, he could no longer do anything else. Li Ming looked at him and said, I have personally experienced the rule of technological civilization. I don't want to mention that past, so I will not let this war break out. Hansuji lowered his head slightly, as if in deep thought. After a long time, he said, Loke Bernard's plan has been brewing for a long time. How can you stop him? After hearing what the other party said, Li Ming relaxed slightly. As soon as he opened his right hand, the sickle hooked into Hansuji's body slowly returned to Li Ming's hand. The sickle hook directly became virtual in Li Ming's palm and eventually disappeared. This action also startled Hansuji. His body suddenly recovered energy and he immediately turned around to look at Li Ming. Li Ming stood straight and looked back at the other party, saying, others may not be able to stop it, but I can, because the person who got the information about Dast is me. After saying this, Li Ming's eyes slightly raised, and when he looked at Hansuji, he had changed a little. Hansuji was also shocked when he heard Li Ming's words, and his eyes seemed to be unbelievable. Li Ming continued, Lonland Galaxy, Thurston Star, go back there, that is your home planet. I will help you personally, after I finish dealing with things here. Hansuji looked at Li Ming quietly, his eyes staring at Li Ming's eyes, as if hesitating, but in the end he couldn't help, but snorted and turned his right hand again. A golden light flashed in his palm, and a bird appeared immediately. The golden bird was not very big, only more than 1 foot high, but the whole thing was golden, as if it existed in a phantom, without eyes, nose and other organs, only the outline and body of the bird. As soon as the bird appeared, it immediately attracted Li Ming's attention, but Li Ming looked at the bird with endless curiosity. The new shoe bird was not ordinary. Hans Ji raised his hand, and the golden bird flew out of his hand and came to Li Ming's side before slowly landing on Li Ming's shoulder. It will take my place to see all the information I want to see, if what you say is true, Hans Ji said. Li Ming glanced at the golden bird on his shoulder and whispered, the elemental beasts in the other world are not simple. It seems that this is the way you get information. Li Ming hit the nail on the head. Hans Ji was secretly surprised by what he said. After all, few people know about the life in the other world. In addition to the civilized creatures of elemental life, there are also elemental beasts and magic beasts in the other world. Zilong is the magic beast from the other world. Of course, the quality and rarity of this elemental beast are naturally higher than that of magic beasts, and the life in the other world is often more special and powerful. Then I will accept your surveillance, and you will see. Li Ming smiled and replied. Hearing Li Ming's straightforward agreement, Hansage's expression has calmed down, as if he has been convinced by Li Ming. In Hansage's eyes, Li Ming seems to be more special than special life. Hansaji looked at Li Ming quietly, hesitated for a while, turned around, and walked silently into the distance, actually leaving this place. Li Ming watched the other party leave, and his body twisted and changed little by little. The original Li Ming also turned into Hansage's appearance little by little. After looking at the golden bird on his shoulder, Li Ming walked towards the place where the aircraft was parked before. Li Ming was very clear about Hansage's ability. The most important thing was this golden bird. If it were not for this thing, Rockbana would definitely not cooperate with it. This bird has a strong ability to obtain information, and that ability has exceeded the scope of all civilized creatures. Even the technological products of technological civilization cannot match it, and this bird is only in another world. Having the same mind as this bird is equivalent to having the ability of a flying dragon, and the ability range of this flying dragon is farther, but it cannot penetrate objects like a flying dragon. Hansaji naturally has other means. This bird is also used to monitor Li Ming's behavior. Once Li Ming fails to fulfill his promise, Hansaji will definitely continue to take his own way and do things that are contrary to Li Ming's purpose. But all this is under Li Ming's control, so Li Ming doesn't care. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 594, about magical weapons. After returning to the construction area by aircraft, Li Ming first went to the alchemy trading building, but he left in a hurry after entering for a moment. Then Li Ming drove the aircraft to leave Wufeng district and headed to another place in Burner Cruz Bay. In the aircraft, Li Ming was still thinking about the Bihuang civilization. There were only 2 people left in the Bihuang civilization, and the survival of the entire civilization was at stake. The cause of the survival of this civilization was a Hanzhao magic weapon, Gongyu Li Shuang sword. This magic weapon has been passed down from generation to generation by the Bihuang civilization. With this magic weapon, this civilization is protected from attacks and plunder by other civilizations. However, in the inheritance of the latest generation, an accident occurred. After all, the inheritance of magic weapons is not easy. It requires purification of consciousness and injection of new consciousness. This process needs to be carried out in secret, otherwise other civilizations outside will seize this opportunity to launch an attack. But such a confidential matter was eventually leaked. After the previous owner of the magic weapon purified his own consciousness, the magic weapon will temporarily become a master-only object, and the next generation of successors needs to add their own consciousness. But during this period, the outside civilization suddenly launched an attack. The entire Bihuang civilization was almost wiped out. The new owner of the magic weapon, Luo Zhaoyang, fled with the magic weapon in a hurry before refining it. He fell into the Hell Ice Star in the pursuit. This planet is an extremely cold planet. Unlike the frozen planets that Li Ming encountered before, the frozen planets only freeze themselves, but the extremely cold planets will freeze the objects that enter. When no one enters this planet, the Li Shuang sword disappears from the civilized world. As another survivor of the Bihuang civilization, Han Siji naturally wants to find a way to enter the Hell Ice Star, take back the Li Shuang sword, and revitalize the Bihuang civilization. However, in the current secondary civilization world, no civilization can enter it. Even the technological products cannot enter. It was not until the appearance of the dark technology civilization Rockburned that Han Siji found his home. Rockburned promised Han Siji that, when the time is right, he would use the dark technology to help him enter the Hell Ice Star. At the same time, Han Siji needed to help Rockburned achieve his goal, which is why the two of them were together. These information about Bihuang civilization and Li Shuang sword appeared in Li Ming's mind like past scenes. Of course, this is what Li Ming saw from Han Siji's mind. Li Ming is naturally very interested in Li Shuang's sword. After all, it is a weapon that can only be used by intelligent civilizations. Han Siji naturally knows Li Ming's purpose, but under Li Ming's persuasion, Han Siji still gave up this idea. After all, Li Shuang's sword is a double-edged sword, which not only protects Bihuang civilization, but also attracts other civilizations. Now the mother planet of Bihuang civilization has become a gathering place for other civilizations and star raiders. What Li Ming promised to the other party is to help it recapture the mother planet. Now Li Ming is heading to the Dufeng district, which is where Han Siji lives. Even if he wants to help Han Siji, it will be after Li Ming has dealt with the current affairs. At the top of the independent mountain, a spaceship is docked outside a huge spherical building. The aircraft driven by Li Ming has arrived. He glanced at the spaceship and his eyes returned to the huge spherical building. At this moment, in a room in the spherical building, Rockburned is sitting opposite another alien. The alien was dressed in silver, like a tights. Except for the two black hole-like eyes, the rest of his body was silver white like liquid metal. Rockburned still looked relaxed, as if no matter who was sitting opposite him, he treated them all the same. Paget, why didn't Gripina come this time? Rockburned asked. Paget sat upright, his expression serious, a dark black light flashing in his eyes, and said, "You know very well the purpose of my visit, so just name a price." Rockburned raised his eyes slightly, glanced at the other party, smiled and shook his head, and said, "It's better to talk about it face to face." Paget was slightly displeased when he heard this, and said, "Dealing with businessmen is really a bit troublesome." Then I'll say it again. Before, it was you who provided the approximate whereabouts of the holder of the intelligence. Our Pumi civilization has completely blocked that area and is closely monitoring it. Having said that, Paget turned his eyes and stared at Rockburned. After hesitating for a moment, he continued, "This person has neither entered the Lowenland galaxy nor returned to the La Putnam galaxy, so he is very likely in your Burner Cruise Bay." When Paget said this, Rockburned was also startled, but his expression quickly returned to natural. Paget naturally noticed this subtle change. Rockburned's eyes rolled, and he was thinking about something. He said, "You reminded me of this, but it's not easy to find this person. After all, I don't know what he looks like." Paget looked at him intently, then raised his hand and pointed at the air. Blue light intertwined in the air, and soon a human-shaped pattern was formed. This human-shaped pattern was Li Ming. Rockburned looked at the pattern, and his eyes suddenly turned, and he looked at Paget again. After a light snort, he said, "Since you have found your lover, why are you still looking for me?" Paget said with a serious face, "If I had found this person, would I still sit here?" The two seemed to be trying to hide something between their words, but their eyes kept looking at each other. At this moment, on the roof of the room, a small head of a green light phantom quietly appeared, and also looked at the phantom. The green light phantom was small and hidden, so the two people at the table below naturally did not notice it. Paget still looked serious and said, "According to the information provided by Jill of the Dulang civilization, this is the only person who has recently entered the big star. If the information obtained is true, then it may be this person. Although we cannot be completely sure that it is this person, it is definitely right to find him first." Paget continued. Hearing this, Rockburned's slightly nervous expression relaxed at this moment. After smiling slightly, he said, "It is naturally very important to be able to find this person. You can rest assured about this." I will definitely do my best to search for this person. Paget stood up after hearing this, looked at the other party quietly, and said, as soon as possible, no matter what the price is, we can accept it. I won't say more about the importance of this information. I will wait for your news. As soon as he finished speaking, Paget turned around and walked out of the room. Li Ming, who was in another room at this time, had a complicated expression and whispered, "You have noticed me." However, in that room, Luke Bernard turned his eyes and looked at another corner of the room and said, "You heard it all, Fidelia." A faint light flashed in the corner and a huge shell emerged. The shell slowly opened and Fidelia, who was dressed in blood red, slowly climbed up from it and said, "So, as the owner of Bernard Cruise Bay, what are you going to do?" Luke Bernard glanced at Fidelia lightly, with a quiet smile on his lips, and said, "I'm just a businessman. Whether it's your orc civilization or the second level civilization world, whoever can give me more benefits, I will help them. To put it bluntly, I only stand on the side of interests." Hearing this, Fidelia twisted her graceful figure, let out a feminine laugh, looked at Luke Bernard with cold eyes, and said, "Your face of a profiteer is really likable." Having said this, Fidelia looked at Rockburner again with a hesitant gaze and said, "Tell me your conditions. We orcs must take this man away." Rockburner had a calm face, and his expression was full of thought. After a moment, he said, "It's too early to talk about conditions now. The most important thing right now is to find this person first." Having said this, Rockburner slowly stood up, glanced at Fidelia out of the corner of his eye, and whispered, "Now, those people in the second level civilization world should have started looking for this person. Whoever can find him is the key. Even though we are in Bernard Cruise Bay, the constraints are still limited after all." As he spoke, Rockburner had already walked outside. Chapter 595. Auction. I have the final say. Leaving the room, Rockburner walked along the corridor to another room. The door of this room was a teleportation portal. After Rockburner approached, he raised his hand and lightly tapped it, and then entered it. With a flash of light, Rockburner came to a large room. In the center of the room was a huge operating table. Rockburner slowly raised his right hand and lightly tapped it. A beam of blue light entered the operating table. Only a faint light flashed, and dots of starlight kept flashing on the operating table, and each starlight was like the stars in the sky. After a moment, the flashing of the starlight suddenly stopped. The operating table, that was originally full of stars, soon had only a light spot. Staring at this light spot, his eyes widened slightly. Rockburner's mouth opened slightly, with a solemn look on his face, and whispered, "This person has actually been to Bernard Cruise Bay." On the operating table of the cruise bay, the light spot was gradually enlarged, and gradually formed a human-shaped pattern from a light spot. It was Li Ming. This is one of the system capabilities of the cruise bay. Any alien who enters the cruise bay will have all their information quietly recorded, and the most important of them is physical characteristics. This time, Luke Bernard stared at the operating table more closely. He raised his hand and clicked. The light spot of Li Ming's figure began to move on the operating table. This was the track of Li Ming recorded by the cruise bay system. The record of cruise bay started from when Li Ming entered the construction area. Li Ming's activity track was naturally recorded in its record. But just as Luke Bernard was watching, a beam of green light suddenly shot in, entered the operating table from below and disappeared. The operating table only showed that Li Ming entered the construction area, and the subsequent tracks all disappeared. It did not show which building Li Ming entered. Luke Bernard saw this, and hurriedly raised his hand again. He saw a faint light flashing on the operating table, but Li Ming's recorded track had completely disappeared. Luke Bernard's face changed drastically, his eyes slightly raised, and whispered, "The subsequent track. Why did it disappear?" Looking at the operating table, Luke Bernard couldn't figure it out for a while, but after thinking for a moment, he raised his hand and clicked again, and a message had been sent. After doing this, Rockburner was still in deep thought, and said to himself, "I'm the only one who can enter here. Why did the guy's track record disappear?" As he was thinking, a light suddenly flashed at the portal not far away. Rockburner raised his hand, and pointed at the portal, and saw a figure walking in from the portal. It was Hans G. "What do you want to talk to me about?" Hans G said as soon as he stepped forward. Rockburner's expression relaxed and said, "How is Waldro's arrangement going?" Hansji replied calmly and naturally, all the source bodies have been auctioned one by one according to your instructions, but I haven't communicated with Waldro about the specific details of the auction. Rockburner nodded slightly, but his eyes changed slightly, and continued, now this plan needs to be changed. Hansji paused after hearing this, but did not respond. Rockburner turned around, and looked at the operating table in front of him. With a solemn expression, he said seriously, from now on, I will activate the planetary defense system and close all the entrances and exits of the cruise bay. At the same time, this source body auction requires the participation of all the people in the Wufeng district. Regardless of whether these people intend to buy or not, as long as they participate, they will get certain benefits. Of course, if someone does not participate, they will be expelled from the cruise bay. Hansji's expression became solemn when he heard this, and he said, I understand. Rockburner then turned his gaze back to Hansji and whispered, contact Waldro and start quickly. Hansji did not respond again. After nodding, he left the room. After Hansji walked out of the main room, he came to another room in the spherical building. At this time, an alien was already waiting inside, and it was Waldro. As soon as he saw Hansji, Waldro immediately cheered up and said, are you ready to start the auction? Hansji looked at Waldro, who looked anxious. Hansji replied calmly, Lookburner has given me full responsibility for this matter. Before the auction officially starts, I need to see the source body first, and then decide the details of the auction. Waldro replied very readily, okay, I'll take you to see the source body now. With that, Waldro turned and walked out, and Li Ming followed closely behind. Waldro was in a hurry to sell the source body for a reason. After all, as long as he stayed in Burner Cruise Bay for one more day, he would have to pay a certain fee. The longer he stayed, the greater the price would be. After all, Waldro's current situation was not very good. If he continued to go to the Lawnland Galaxy, or return to the Lapnum Galaxy, he would encounter attacks from the Jingpo civilization. Under the premise that he could not go to these two places, it was the best choice to sell the source body as soon as possible. The Jingpo civilization belongs to the Hydra Galaxy cluster, which is far away from the Centaurus Galaxy cluster. However, this civilization has always suffered from the brilliance of the Orc civilization, and lagged behind in development, so it is also one of the biggest enemies of the Orc civilization. However, the Orc civilization has been under pressure from the secondary civilization world, and cannot really eradicate the civilization, nor can it get rid of the harassment of the other party, so it can only avoid it as much as possible. Hansji, who was transformed by Li Ming, came to a giant spaceship outside the construction area under the leadership of Waldro. In the passage of the spaceship, Waldro was in front and Li Ming was behind, going deeper along the passage until they stopped in front of a portal. Waldro raised his hand and lightly tapped. The portal lighted slightly, and then the two entered it together. This is a large cabin in the spaceship. It is dim inside, but all environmental changes can be clearly seen. The entire cabin is filled with square cages. These cages are composed of light curtains. The cube composed of phantom light curtains is like a glass display cabinet, and each one has an alien in it. These aliens were like animals waiting to be slaughtered, chained and unable to move. Waldro took a glance at them and said, these are all the source bodies waiting to be sold. Li Ming glanced at them and nodded slightly. He walked back and forth between the cages. From the appearance of these aliens, Li Ming could see some clues. As he looked, his eyes narrowed slightly. He said intentionally or unintentionally, where do these source bodies come from? Waldro replied, these were all looted from the local supercluster last time. When Li Ming heard about the local supercluster, his expression changed slightly, but soon returned to normal. The local supercluster is also known as the Virgo supercluster. It is a galaxy group that includes the local galaxy group and the Virgo galaxy cluster. It is also the galaxy cluster of Li Ming's hometown. Originally, Li Ming saw some clues from the appearance of these aliens. This time, he asked tentatively. When he heard Waldro say this, Li Ming rolled his eyes and began to look around. Although his steps were slow, he looked at all the aliens here with his eyes. Soon, two aliens came into Li Ming's sight. These two were Biggs and Tanjing. Li Ming didn't look at the two of them anymore. He just pretended to be casual and stopped in front of their cages. He turned around to look at Waldro and said, "What price do you orcs plan to offer for the source body here?" Waldro didn't answer immediately after hearing this question. He smiled and said, "The higher the selling price, the better. After all, the higher the price, the more we orcs and you Bernard Cruz bacon share." Li Ming nodded slightly, smiled lightly, and replied, "That's true." Having said that, Li Ming suddenly turned around and walked outside, saying as he walked, "I've seen the source bodies here. They're pretty good. I'll notify you of the specific selling time separately." Waldro listened to the previous words with relish, but when he heard the latter part of the notice, Waldro's expression immediately changed, with a look of surprise on his face, and said, Notify me separately?" Li Ming then paused, looked back at the other party, and said, "What? Do you have any objections?" No, I want to arrange it as soon as possible. It's best to arrange it as soon as possible." Although Waldro was dissatisfied, he had no choice but to respond in a nice voice. Chapter 596 Dark Technology, Blood Hunt. Li Ming naturally understood the reason why Waldro was anxious. Although he could not see the other party's mind with his wisdom eyes, Hans G knew about Waldro's current situation before. Li Ming naturally understood this point after gaining Hans G's cognition. Waldro was eager to take action at the moment, so Li Ming naturally could not let the other party succeed easily. "Okay, this matter was personally instructed by Rockbunner to me. I will definitely arrange it as soon as possible. You should treat the source body well first, so that you can sell it at a good price. I will go to Wufeng district now to prepare for this auction," Li Ming said. Hearing this, Waldro smiled and said flatteringly, "Don't worry, I will definitely not treat these source bodies badly." Li Ming nodded with satisfaction, looked at the place where Tanjing and Biggs were, turned around and left quickly. Li Ming was very clear about the fact that these two people were captured by the orcs. He had known it before on the Great Star, but Li Ming himself could not save himself at that time, let alone save others. It was different now. Hansuji, who was transformed by Li Ming, dominated the entire source body transaction plan, so Li Ming had a chance to rescue the two. Without any risk, Li Ming could lend a helping hand. A moment later, a flying vehicle left Dufeng district. The one riding the flying vehicle was Hansuji, who was transformed by Li Ming. While flying to Wufeng district, Li Ming was still thinking about it. He saved Tanjing because of her beauty. On Earth, she was a goddess with both figure and face. Li Ming had compassion, so he couldn't bear to see her end up in a miserable state. Even if he couldn't get her, Li Ming would still help her with a little effort. As for Biggs, there was no emotional connection between Li Ming and him, nor was there any conflict of interest. It was completely out of personal will. But Li Ming didn't have a clear idea of how to save him, but he did have more important things to do when he went to Wufeng district. After flying for half a day, the flying vehicle that Li Ming was riding arrived at a high-rise building in the middle of the Wufeng district building complex. This building is the control center of the entire Wufeng district. It is the tallest building in the complex. After the aircraft stopped at the top side, the hatch slowly opened, and Li Ming flew out. A portal appeared on the edge of the top of the building, and Li Ming moved into it. After passing through the portal, Li Ming came to a room. At this time, there were many staff members busy in the room. When they saw Li Ming coming, they all saluted. Li Ming didn't care. He walked quickly to the control console in the room. After looking around, he raised his hand and nodded. The blue light flashed, and a day's information appeared on the console. This information was edited by Li Ming. Then he glanced at other people and said, "Send this information to everyone in Wufeng district." The alien in front of the console immediately bowed and replied, "Yes." Li Ming turned his eyes and looked at the console. Through here, he could quickly understand the information of people in Wufeng district. After looking for a while, Li Ming walked away from the console. Coming to the window at the edge of the high-rise building, through the transparent window, Li Ming looked at another high-rise building not far away, his eyes fixed on it, as if he was looking at a familiar person. He raised his right hand, and then a green light shot out from his fingertips, passed through the transparent glass, and flew towards the building. At this moment, in the circular building in the Dufeng district, Rockbunner was still standing in front of the operating table, and his right hand slowly took out a silver gray metal ball. He threw the metal ball gently and saw silver light flashing. The silver gray metal ball, which was the size of a wrinkled palm, suddenly scattered, as if the metal ball was originally formed by splicing fragments. As soon as it scattered, a gray shadow sphere appeared between the fragments. Silver arcs kept jumping between the fragments, and a figure appeared vaguely in the gray shadow part, but only the outline, and the person and body features could not be seen clearly, as if it was just a shadow of a person. Although it was just a vague outline, Luke Bernard also had a serious and respectful look. He bowed his head and then said, "I have entered a new situation here, and can now accept the assessment." The vague shadow did not move, and directly replied, "Humph, waiting for your report. When can we achieve the goal?" Judging from the time, Blood Hunter should have arrived at Bernard's cruise bay, and he will help you secretly. Luke Bernard was suddenly startled when he heard this. His eyes widened a little, but he immediately bowed his head and said, "I understand." As soon as the voice fell, the metal fragments in front of him began to close quickly, and the lightning disappeared with the phantom, returning to the state of a metal ball. Luke Bernard took the metal ball in his hand again. His eyes kept turning, and he whispered, "Headquarters, finally pay attention to me here." As he spoke, his right hand also clenched the metal ball, and his solemn expression seemed like a subordinate recognized by the leader. However, at this time, in Wufeng district, an alien was sitting on the top of the building. This alien was sitting on the platform at the top of the building, one leg dangling outside the building, the other leg flat on the platform, with his back against the pillar of the building on the top, swinging the dangling leg freely, looking at the distance leisurely. This person was the Blood Hunter. More importantly, the alien's body was completely transparent. The transparency was like flowing air, sometimes flipping out an outline, and sometimes disappearing completely like air. The flipping outline was like transparent water. You can only see it if you look closely, but when you look closely, it disappears completely. He took out his left hand and flipped it. A golden disc appeared on his transparent palm. Then he threw it gently, and the disc fell on the roof next to him. The disc was like a round box, the size of a palm. When it first landed, it seemed to be just a piece of garbage thrown away at random, without any changes. At this time, a green light had entered the building, where Zuhu was sitting. This building was exactly the building that Li Ming had watched from the window before, but the top of the building was a tower-shaped building. Zuhu was just at the back of the building, which allowed Li Ming to see the situation on the other side. At the moment, when the green light entered the building, the disc discarded by Zuhu suddenly flashed with a hum, and a strong breath shot out vertically from it. Breath is not energy, nor is it a light body. It is something that exists, but cannot be captured. The breath goes straight to the sky above, and to the depths of the ground below. With the upper and lower ends of the disc as the base points, a straight breath line is formed between the sky and the earth. Of course, this breath line is not something that anyone can see or sense. After a few seconds, this breath light suddenly spread out with a hum. It was like a cylinder that was constantly expanding, but at an incredibly fast speed. In just a moment, the breath light column enveloped the entire Wufeng district. Although the range has expanded, its upper and lower ends are still connected to the sky and the depths of the ground. At this time, Zuhu sat there motionless, turned his head slightly, and glanced at the entire building area. At this time, the building area under the aura was completely different. In the eyes of the Blood Hunter, all the buildings and objects were transparent, with only the aliens walking back and forth. The aliens who were originally in the building, underground, and in the aircraft now appeared in front of the Blood Hunter without any obstruction. The Blood Hunter's eyes finally stopped on Li Ming. Even though there was a tower-like building in the middle, the Blood Hunter could clearly see where Li Ming was. At this time, Li Ming looked a little different. The Blood Hunter's eyes widened slightly and whispered, "So, it's an illusion." In the eyes of the Blood Hunter, Li Ming seemed to be a superposition of two figures, one in Li Ming's human form, and the other in Han Zhi's form. It was under the induction of the aura that Li Ming's ability to transform was recognized by the Blood Hunter. At this moment, Li Ming had not noticed anything unusual, but just stared at the building under the Blood Hunter, because in this building, two alien groups were talking about something. In the top room of the building, on one side was Jill, headed by the Dulang civilization, as well as Nu Iron Cannonbone. The other side was the pageant led by the Pumi civilization, and Li Ming's flying dragon was at the top of the room, watching these people. Chapter 597, Stopping the War. I have conveyed the information to Rockburner truthfully. The next step is to wait for Rockburner's result. If this person is in the Burner Cruise Bay, then Rockburner will definitely find him, Paget said calmly. Jill nodded slightly and said, there are already a lot of people from both sides in the Burner Cruise Bay. As long as this person appears, we can definitely take him down in the first place, but, Paget's eyes turned, and he was puzzled. He said, but what? Jill's eyes turned, and he glanced at Nuire and Peogu beside him, and continued, but this guy has some tricks. You must be extra careful when you take action. Paget snorted coldly and said, he is just a second level civilization. If he can appear in front of me, I will definitely take care of him in minutes, and you Dulang civilization won't even need to do anything. Jill glanced at the other party and was about to say something when a green light suddenly flashed from the top of the room. A beam of green light shot onto the table between the two of them. The strong green light radiated in all directions, and after a flash, a green shadow appeared. It was Li Ming. This shadow, like Li Ming, was the flying dragon. As soon as he appeared, he squatted on the table and looked at the four people from front to back. The sudden appearance of Li Ming startled the four people. Their originally relaxed bodies suddenly shook and tensed up, but after confirming that it was just a phantom of consciousness, their slightly nervous expression slowly relaxed. It's great to see you all at the same time. Li Ming slowly stood up from the table and said so. Jill stared at Li Ming's green phantom and whispered silently, it's just a phantom of ideology. This sentence was not loud, but Paget on the opposite side heard it very clearly. He turned his eyes and said, then, the real body should be nearby. As he said this, he began to look around. Jill and the two people behind him also looked around at this time, as if looking for Li Ming's traces. At this time, Li Ming had already noticed this and whispered, don't look for it. My mental power is far beyond your imagination. I came here just to make one thing clear to you. Hearing Li Ming's words, the four people at the table paused and turned their eyes to Li Ming. But Paget seemed to have no patience and said directly and viciously, don't talk nonsense. I just want to ask you a question. Is the intelligence in your hands? Li Ming glanced at him with disdain and said, what you just said, isn't it nonsense? My time is limited. You just need to listen to me next. Li Ming's face suddenly changed. Under the serious expression, it seemed that something very important had happened, and Paget could only look at Li Ming viciously, but didn't say anything more. Seeing that the four people had quieted down, Li Ming continued, the intelligence is indeed in my hands, but before talking about the intelligence, I still have to mention dark technology civilization first. Dark technology civilization. As soon as the 6 words came out, the four people at the table were stunned and looked at each other from time to time. Although Li Ming didn't know the details about the dark technology civilization, it was obvious that the four people knew it. Li Ming continued, the owner of Burner Cruise Bay, Rockburner, is a dark technology civilization. He has been lurking in the Centaur galaxy cluster for so long, just to promote the outbreak of war and create conditions for the invasion of dark technology. Both the Pumi civilization and the Dulang civilization are advanced beings in the second level civilization world. If you get intelligence and start a war with the Orc civilization, then the final result may be the demise of the Orc civilization, and you will also pay a price for it. At this time, the dark technology civilization will invade here. At that time, can you still resist the invasion of the dark technology civilization? Li Ming continued. While speaking, Li Ming's eyes kept scanning these people, and then continued, although the Orc civilization is developing rapidly, it is a self-limiting race after all. Without the source body, this race civilization will be very weak. Although I don't know much about the dark technology civilization, I believe that the dark technology civilization will never be as easy to defeat as the Orc civilization. Li Ming said. After listening to what Li Ming said, the four of them suddenly became quiet, but Paget still rolled his eyes and kept looking at Li Ming. He chuckled twice and said, although I don't know the purpose of your saying this, isn't your statement a bit too far-fetched? Rockburner has appeared in the Centaurus galaxy cluster for hundreds of years. Moreover, there was a war between us and the orcs. Why was there no invasion of dark technology civilization that time? Li Ming hesitated when he heard this. He didn't know about the last war, so when he heard the other party say this, Li Ming didn't know how to respond for a while. Seeing this, Paget immediately continued, "Humph, you are obviously doing this to stop us from destroying the orc civilization. Do you know that the surrounding galaxies have been harmed by them? What is your purpose in doing this?" Li Ming was immediately displeased when he heard this, but he did not refute it immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze and looked at Jill, saying, "If I have any purpose, it is that I want to enter the second level civilization world, but I don't want to be invaded by dark technology before I enter." Seeing this, Jill nodded slightly, and a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He said, "Li Ming, if you give me the information, I can allow you to enter the second level civilization world of our supercluster, just like I promised before. Although you didn't rescue Dempsey, it's the same to get the information." Turning his gaze to Jill, his eyes stared at each other for a while. After hesitating for a while, Li Ming said, "I will give you the information, but now is not the time. I have made things very clear. Don't you understand what I mean?" Having said that, Li Ming looked at Paget again and said, "Only by killing Rockburner of the Dark Technology civilization first can we continue to resolve the dispute with the Orc civilization. Okay, that's all. The rest is up to you." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's shadow flashed with light and turned into dots of starlight and disappeared on the spot. Seeing Li Ming disappear, Jill turned his eyes and looked at Paget, saying, "Paget, what are you going to do next?" Paget did not respond immediately. He was already thinking about something by moving his eyes left and right. After a moment, he raised his eyes and said, "If what this guy said is true, it is not a trivial matter involving the dark technology civilization. It needs to be reported to the upper level. It is not something that you and I can decide." Jill heard this and understood the other party's intention. Then he turned around and said, "Then report to the upper level first, and then make a decision." Having said this, Jill really turned around and walked out of the room. Watching Jill leave, Paget stood there motionless, as if thinking about something. At this time, the blood hunter on the rooftop blinked his eyes, his face slightly solemn. His transparent body slowly stood up, snorted softly, and with a whoosh, his body disappeared on the spot. At this time, Li Ming turned invisible and returned to his original body, his eyes still looking at the building not far away from the window. "Lord Hans G, all the information has been sent out according to your instructions." A soldier standing behind Li Ming bowed and saluted, saying so. Li Ming then turned around and walked away directly. Sitting back in his aircraft, Li Ming left Wufeng district again. At this moment in Wufeng district, there were suddenly more people coming and going on the streets. Some of these people walked alone, some in groups of 3 or 5, and sometimes people talked a lot. "I heard that participation in this source body auction is a must, but we are not buying anything. Don't say any more. There will be rewards if you go anyway. At worst, you can just walk around and get your rewards before leaving." Yeah. Various discussions were heard on the streets. The information about the source body auction had been sent out, and everyone in Wufeng district had received it. Most of the discussions were related to the source body auction. Chapter 598, Admiration, but Distance. On the upper floor of a high-rise building in Wufeng district, Cannonbone was standing at the window looking outside. "The Orc civilization has started auctioning the source body," Cannonbone said thoughtfully, his eyes sweeping around the street outside. Noir then floated to the window, looked outside, and said, "Isn't Bernacruz Bay auctioning it?" Cannonbone snorted when he heard this, and before he could say anything else, the portal behind him suddenly lit up, and Jill had walked in. Jill seemed to have known the situation outside, and came to the table in the room, and sat down slowly, saying, "Without the orcs providing the source body, how could Rockburner have a source body auction? The source body is the most important resource of the orcs, but it is actually auctioned publicly. It seems that they are already preparing for war." Jill continued. Cannonbone and Noir looked at Jill when they heard this. Jill glanced back at the two of them and said, "I have just contacted the headquarters. Things may be much more complicated than we thought." Cannonbone and Noir looked at each other. Joel slowly stood up, came to the side of the two, looked up at the sky outside the window, and whispered again, according to the information obtained by the headquarters, what Li Ming said is very likely to be true. Cannonbone Nua's face changed drastically at this time, but the two also turned slightly and looked up, also looking at the sky outside the window. At this moment, a layer of purple barrier was slowly forming in the sky, which was the planetary defense system. At this moment, Li Ming drove the aircraft to the Dufeng area, but Li Ming did not enter the spherical building, but came to the edge of the spacecraft next to the spherical building. The spacecraft seemed to have noticed Li Ming's aircraft. The side of the spacecraft immediately made a squeak sound, and the surface of the spacecraft suddenly slid away, opening like a sliding door, and Li Ming's aircraft immediately fell into the open space inside. The outer wall of the side then slowly closed, and at this time Li Ming's position became an independent cabin, and the lights lit up one by one, and Waldrow's figure appeared again. The hatch of the aircraft opened, and Li Ming got out. Waldero, who saw Li Ming, still looked anxious, but his eyes were full of respect, and he said, "Mr. Hansji, this auction." Waldero hadn't finished speaking when Li Ming waved his hand to stop him and said, "The situation in Dufeng district is complicated, and the auction may have to be put on hold for some time." "What?" Waldero suddenly said in surprise, his eyes wide open with anger, but he immediately calmed down when he saw Li Ming, and could only say helplessly, "Then, what should we do?" Li Ming didn't answer, and directly left the cabin, and walked into the interior of the spacecraft. Waldero didn't ask any more questions, but just followed Li Ming closely. Li Ming was walking in front, saying, "It's not impossible to start the auction as soon as possible, but you should know that, although I'm the person in charge of this matter, the people below only recognize Lokeburner. To put it bluntly, if Lokeburner is not in a hurry, the progress of this matter will be very slow." At this point, Li Ming had already come to the portal of a cabin, and his footsteps stopped, and he turned around and said, "You can understand what I said, right?" Waldro was confused, and only half understood what Li Ming said, but he flashed in front of Li Ming and clicked casually, and the portal burst. Li Ming turned around, and entered the portal. With a flash of light, Li Ming and Waldro came to the cabin, where the source bodies were stored. Li Ming glanced at these source bodies, and mainly looked at the positions of Tanjing and Biggs. Rodaro's mind was still pondering over what Li Ming had just said, with a confused look on his face, not quite clear. In the end, he could only stammer, "Then, we can only find Rockburner again." Li Ming glanced at him fiercely, snorted, and said, "The reason why Rockburner handed this matter to me is that he is not in a hurry for the source body auction. Otherwise, he would have done it himself long ago. Can't you see that?" As he spoke, Li Ming walked towards the depths of the cabin, looking around at the same time, observing every source body intentionally or unintentionally. Waldro behind him had understood by now and nodded slightly. Although he understood what Li Ming meant, he did not make any progress on the matter at hand, and immediately asked, "Then the auction, will it be delayed like this? I don't have that much time." Li Ming was still in no hurry, and finally stopped in front of Tanjing's cage, but turned around, looked at Waldro, and said, "If you want to start as soon as possible, there is still a way. After all, the people below only listen to the orders of two people, one is Rockburner, and the other is energy. As long as I give them energy, I will be able to facilitate this matter more easily." Waldro frowned suddenly when he heard this, and his expression changed slightly. When he was about to say something, Li Ming suddenly smiled and continued, "Of course, if you don't want to take this fee, you can exchange it with two source bodies." As he spoke, Li Ming glanced at the source bodies around him. Waldero finally understood. Looking at the source bodies around him, he smiled slightly and said, "As long as they can be auctioned and sold as soon as possible, I'm willing to hand over two source bodies." Li Ming also nodded gently and said, "Okay. I will personally select these two source bodies and take them away. As long as we have these two source bodies, the auction can be implemented immediately." Waldero had been anxious for a long time. Hearing what Li Ming said, he was secretly relieved and said, "Okay, then I will trouble Mr. Hansji." Li Ming waved his hand gently and said, "You can drive the spaceship to Wufeng district now. After I finish selecting here, I will go to the Wufeng district control console to preside over the auction." That's great. I'll go right away. As he spoke, Waldero turned around and walked directly out of the cabin. Waldero was now going to the main cabin and then drive the spaceship to Wufeng district. Li Ming looked at Waldero's figure leaving. His eyes turned slightly and looked at the cage beside him. He leaned forward and slowly squatted down. The person locked in the cage in front of him was Tanjing. Under the transparent barrier, Li Ming stared at the other person intently. Tanjing looked particularly weak at this moment, with her long hair scattered over her shoulders, and a few strands covering her pale and haggard face. The energy in her body could not function normally, so this kind of weakness was naturally normal. She wore a white cloth shirt inside her upper body, a blue animal leather jacket outside the cloth shirt, and a light yellow short skirt on her lower body, with two long legs extending outside the crowd. Her white bare feet were placed side by side, and her squatting posture was like the letter N. The only thing that remained unchanged was the cloth band on her forehead. I don't know what the purpose was, because the cloth band had been there since Li Ming first saw her. This figure and appearance were exactly the type that Li Ming yearned for. If not, Li Ming would not have saved her life several times. At present, Li Ming still had the appearance of Han Siji, so the other party naturally could not recognize him. However, being stared at by Li Ming, Tanjing's eyes suddenly raised. Those big eyes were beautiful in themselves, but when they suddenly looked at Li Ming, they were full of coldness, as if releasing anger and chill. This made Li Ming, who was admiring, startled, and he felt a little uncomfortable when he was seen by that look. Through the transparent barrier, it was like looking at an animal trapped in a cage. A soft hum came out of Li Ming's mouth, and he shook his head gently inside slightly. The other party's arrogant attitude was like a rich girl in the human world. As a poor boy, it seemed that he could only watch from a distance, but Li Ming did not want to force it. After watching for a while, he raised his hand. A blue light flashed, and the barrier in front of him disappeared immediately. Without the barrier, the pure and clear face appeared again. Li Ming waved his hand, and another blue light flashed, and all the chains on the other party were broken. But because it was too long to be imprisoned by the chains, Tanjing, who had just been untied, did not do anything immediately, but just recovered his energy on the spot. Li Ming ignored the other party, moved his body, and came to the cage next to him. Looking up, it was Biggs in the cage. The bear-like head made people recognize it at a glance, and left a deep memory. Li Ming also raised his hand and untied the barrier, but did not break the chain immediately. At this time, Biggs' eyes looked at Li Ming. Chapter 599 Stupidity. Not only Biggs, but also Tanjing beside him, and the aliens in the cages around him, all turned their eyes to Li Ming, but their eyes were full of pleading, as if they hoped that Li Ming could also release them. Li Ming just glanced at him, and his eyes returned to Biggs. "Where's Cottrell?" Li Ming suddenly asked. When Biggs heard the name, he was immediately startled and looked at Li Ming with wide eyes. Li Ming said calmly, "According to Cottrell's plan, he should first occupy your aerospace civilization consciousness, and then occupy the body of a silicon-based life. You are here. What about that guy?" Li Ming continued. Biggs looked at Li Ming without saying a word. But Tanjing on the side suddenly turned his eyes and looked at Biggs beside him, and then thought to himself, aerospace civilization, this guy's also. Biggs just stared at Li Ming blankly, but he didn't say a word. Li Ming did not continue to ask. His eyes narrowed slightly, and with the ability of wisdom eyes, Li Ming had already seen what he wanted to know from the other party's consciousness. Watching with his eyes, he whispered, "So that's how it is." He stood up slowly and looked down at the two. Li Ming had already obtained information about Cottrell. This genius biological civilization originally fell into the hands of the white civilization, that is, the Andromeda Galaxy, but later escaped and returned to the Milky Way alone. But before leaving, Cottrell took away Biggs's artifact, the illusion. Li Ming was just curious about those past events, and was not very interested. Saving Biggs was also a matter of convenience. Watching the two, Li Ming's eyes first looked at Tanjing and said, "If I'll let you go, what are your plans next?" Tanjing looked up at Li Ming with a confused face, not understanding the meaning of Li Ming's words. After all, Han Ji was a stranger to Tanjing. In this profit-seeking world, this question was unanswerable. After asking this question, Li Ming's eyes have seen the answer from the other party's thoughts. Although Tanjing did not say a word, she has considered Li Ming's question in her heart, and the direction of these considerations is naturally under Li Ming's insight. Li Ming's face gradually stiffened, and he raised his right hand and threw out a metal capsule. At the same time, he waved his hand casually, and a blue light flashed, and the chain on Biggs beside him also opened. But Li Ming never looked at Biggs, but just whispered, "Follow me." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming had already walked out. Tanjing didn't know why, looked at Biggs on the side, then reached out to pick up the metal capsule, stood up and followed Li Ming. Biggs didn't stay for long, and hurriedly got up, and chased after him. After walking out of the cabin, they soon came to a passage. Li Ming was in front and the two were behind. As they were walking, Tanjing suddenly said, "Why did you pick us?" Li Ming glanced behind him and said without turning his head, "There is a guy named Li Ming who has been secretly paying attention to you, so." Before Li Ming finished speaking, Tanjing's face changed immediately. Even Biggs behind him understood something at once, because the name Li Ming was too familiar to the two. Among them, Biggs gritted his teeth, his expression was tense, and he looked helpless and unwilling. In his heart, he secretly said, "It turned out to be Li Ming. I have always regarded him as an opponent, as a target that must be defeated, but now, even the second level civilization is working for him, and I." Thinking about Li Ming and looking at his own situation, Biggs suddenly felt a surge of anger in his heart, but he was helpless. Tanjing looked at Han Siji in front of him with slightly wide eyes. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Li Ming, where is he?" Li Ming ignored him and continued to walk forward until he stopped in front of a metal door, but he did not turn around, nor did he say anything secretive. He just said, "Remember the question I asked you just now?" Tanjing's eyebrows tightened, and then he nodded gently. "If I'll let you go, what are your plans next?" This question reappeared in Tanjing's mind. Li Ming sensed the other party's nod, then raised his hand and pointed, and the metal door opened. Li Ming stood in. It turned out to be an elevator here. Tanjing and Biggs followed closely behind. The three entered. The metal door closed automatically, and then began to rise. After a few seconds, it slowly stopped, and the metal door opened again. Li Ming walked out first. At this time, they had arrived at a huge parallel cabin. Li Ming stood at the door without moving. The elevator door behind him closed. Li Ming turned around and looked at the other party and said, "Although you didn't answer that question, I saw many answers in your mind. You gave up your hatred. You wanted to return to the mother planet of the space civilization. You began to understand why those dead people chose to let you live." Li Ming spoke slowly, and every word and sentence hit Tanjing's heart. This made Tanjing open her mouth slightly in surprise, just looking at Li Ming, but not saying a word. After pausing for a few seconds, Li Ming suddenly continued, "All your thoughts indicate that you have grown up, but, among these thoughts, there is no figure of Li Ming." At this point, Li Ming looked at the other party's big eyes, and at this time, there was no cold breath in his eyes, but like the surface of a lake, rippling with waves. He suddenly turned around, avoiding Tanjing's eyes, and walked to the depths of the cabin, still saying, "Since you haven't thought about him, why ask him where he is doing?" Tanjing stood there blankly, motionless, with a stiff expression, and seemed to be stunned for a moment. It took a few seconds for him to react, but at this time Li Ming had already come to the depths of the cabin. Tanjing blinked, and then quickly walked over. Biggs behind him also did not move. He looked at Li Ming, who was going away for a while, and then looked at Tanjing beside him. He didn't understand why, but he didn't say a word until Tanjing walked to the depths, and then he followed. This cabin is very spacious, like a huge square, with nothing inside. When Li Ming stopped, the whole cabin suddenly flashed with light, and the lights around the cabin wall lit up, and the whole cabin also became bright. At this time, there were two small spaceships in the middle of the cabin. Li Ming then said, "This is the top of the spaceship. The hatch on the top will be open soon. At that time, you can take the spaceship here to leave here, but now is not the safest time, so you can only wait here for a while." After explaining, Li Ming moved and passed by Tanjing, just preparing to leave here the same way. Before Li Ming walked far, Tanjing suddenly turned around. Wait. Tanjing called Li Ming. Li Ming paused, but did not turn around. He opened his mouth slightly and whispered, "Is there anything else?" Tanjing looked at the back of Hansji, who had transformed into Li Ming, hesitated for a moment, and said, "If possible, please tell Li Ming that I will wait for him in a place." Li Ming's eyes moved to the corner of his eyes after hearing this. After pausing for 2 seconds, he quickly left. At this time, in the central room of the circular building in the Dufeng area, Rock Bernard was standing in front of the operating table and looking at the Bernard cruise bay. The Bernard cruise bay in front of him had indeed changed. The entire planet began to flash with regional lights. Of course, the most important thing was that the entire planet had activated the planetary defense system. Outsiders would not be able to enter, and those inside would not be able to leave. As for the flashing lights in those areas, they were the divisions of Bernard Cruise Bay on this planet. The 5 peaks covered an area of hundreds of miles that was flashing with light. Just as Loke Bernard was observing carefully, a transparent figure behind him was approaching him. This transparent figure was like a ball of walking water, appearing and disappearing from time to time. I'm being played around by others, and I still look like I'm in control of the overall situation. It's really disappointing. As the voice sounded, the transparent body began to change, and the body began to materialize, just like a person slowly walking out of mirror, and the limbs that were stretched out first began to show their original appearance. Chapter 600, Killing Intent in the Eyes. He was wearing a grey cloth, and his body was thin and somewhat similar to Rock Bernard's bamboo-like figure. He was wearing grey clothes all over his body, just like the desert, and there was also a long cloak behind him. He had white hair and long ears. Apart from that, his other features were almost the same as those of humans. The person who came was the Blood Hunter. Rock Bernard was shocked when he saw the Blood Hunter. He bowed his head and was slightly stunned. The sudden arrival of this person made Rock Bernard a little overwhelmed. The Blood Hunter quickly came to the operating table, raised his hand, and locked the 5 Peaks district, and expanded the terrain of the 5 Peaks district. It's time to give up Bernard Star. Rock Bernard, your foundation ends here. The Blood Hunter turned around and looked at Rock Bernard and said coldly. Rock Bernard's expression changed, and he glanced at the operating table. The anger in his heart was suppressed, and he said with a puzzled look, "What do you mean? Aren't you here to help me? Why do you want me to give up? I'm about to succeed." Rock Bernard was dissatisfied and spread his hands to defend himself. Blood Hunter stared at him, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Okay, then I'll explain it to you clearly." As he spoke, he turned around and lightly tapped the operating table. A blue light flashed, and a human figure emerged. The blue light was like the lines of a painting, weaving a portrait of Li Ming above the operating table. When he saw this person, Rock Bernard also widened his eyes slightly. Blood Hunter also continued, "This man transformed into Hansji and has been lurking by your side. He has told the Pumi civilization and the Dulang civilization all about your identity, so you failed." Rock Bernard slowly turned his head, his eyes constantly looking at Li Ming. His face was already extremely angry, but he still shook his head gently, as if he couldn't believe it, and whispered, "Impossible, impossible." Blood Hunter ignored him and continued, "Representatives of the Pumi civilization and the Dulang civilization have reported this information to the headquarters of the second level civilization world respectively. I think your plan ends here." Rock Bernard clenched his fists and suddenly hit me with a brick. He looked at Blood Hunter with flaming eyes and said viciously, How is this possible? My hard work for hundreds of years." Blood Hunter had a calm face and whispered, "Now, you shouldn't say these stupid things to me here. The most important thing is to minimize the losses together." Having said that, Blood Hunter clicked on the console again and said, "Go and communicate with the orcs. Bernard will patrol the bay and hand over everything to them." As he said this, the light on the operating table flashed again, and the Wufeng district began to change slightly. The Blood Hunter continued, "This may be the last function of Bernard's patrol bay. The barrier blocks the Wufeng district and kills everyone inside." Loke Bernard's trembling eyes seemed to be unable to accept this reality. Under his vicious expression, his teeth were tightly clenched together, and he whispered, "I must kill that guy myself." As soon as this sentence came out, the Blood Hunter who was operating suddenly paused and stopped. He looked at Burner with his eyes, hesitated for a moment, and said, "I'll wait for you outside the patrol bay. I'll give you a day to deal with the last little thing." After saying this, the blood hunter turned around and left quickly. Looking at the figure of the blood hunter leaving, Burner's expression became ferocious, and he turned around and left the room. Walking in the corridor, the sound of footsteps was particularly clear in the quiet environment. When he came to a door, Burner stopped, raised his hand and pointed, and the metal door opened. Entering the room, it was empty, seemingly empty, and Burner said directly in the room, "I have found the information you are looking for." As soon as the voice fell, a huge shell slowly emerged from an empty space in the room, and the shell slowly opened, and a red enchanting alien slowly crawled out of it. Sure enough, is the system of the cruise bay still very fast? So what price are you going to offer? Fidelia asked, staring at Bernard. Bernard's mood gradually stabilized, and then he looked at the other party, smiled slightly, and said, "This transaction, but zero cost." At this moment, a large number of aliens have gathered in front of the huge square in the Wufeng district building complex. There is a high platform in the middle of the square, and at this moment, there is a person standing on the high platform, Waldrow. And below the high platform, the crowd surged, like a large gathering, and people kept approaching this side on the streets, and in the air of the building complex. Waldrow was on the high platform, and above Waldrow's head was a spaceship, which was also driven by Waldrow's group. Standing on the platform, looking at the crowd below, Waldrow had a satisfied look on his face. Li Ming was in the main cabin of the spaceship at this time. Looking at the scene in front of him, he turned around and walked out. A blue light flashed at the bottom of the spaceship, and a beam of light shot from the bottom of the spaceship to the platform. The figure of Ansji transformed by Li Ming immediately emerged and stood beside Waldrow. "I didn't expect it to start so soon," Waldrow said with excitement and satisfaction. Li Ming on the side smiled lightly and said, "You have paid to source bodies, so the progress of this matter will naturally be extraordinary." As the two talked like this, the crowd below had gathered almost full. Although aliens continued to join the crowd in the distance, there were only a few people. Li Ming took a quick glance at the crowd, then turned his gaze to Waldrow beside him and said, "The crowd is almost there. I think we can take out the source body and start directly." "Yes." Waldrow also looked at the crowd and nodded with satisfaction, saying, "I'll take out the Osei source body." Waldrow turned around and looked up at the spaceship in the sky. Just as he was about to operate something, his left wrist suddenly made a beeping sound. Waldrow immediately stopped and lowered his head slightly to look at the device on his wrist. He saw a blue light flashing, and a message had appeared. When he saw the content of the message, Waldrow's eyes widened, and his expression suddenly changed. He immediately looked at Li Ming beside him. His strange expression and strange behavior also attracted Li Ming's attention. Li Ming also turned his head to look at the other party. At the moment of looking at each other, Li Ming actually saw a hint of murderous intent in Waldrow's eyes. "Why don't you take out the source body?" Li Ming asked casually. Waldrow was startled, then his expression returned to normal. He said, "Okay, I'll go get the source body out." As soon as he finished speaking, Waldrow flew up and turned into a blue light and entered the spaceship above. Li Ming turned his head to the side and looked at Waldrow's disappearing figure. His face showed a look of thinking about something else. He looked around and squinted slightly. He looked down at the platform under his feet, and a blue halo was released from his feet. The halo was like a water ripple, rippling on the surface of the platform under his feet. At this time, the crowd below the platform had begun to boil gradually. Various noisy sounds were constantly emitted. Some were angry shouts, some were questioning, and various sounds made the crowd like a pot of boiling water. At this time, the bottom of the spaceship above his head suddenly flashed with a buzz, and a ball of light shot down, and Waldrow's figure suddenly shot down. Li Ming looked over and frowned, because the only person who came down from the spaceship was Waldrow, and there was no source body. "Didn't you just go to get the source body?" "How?" Puff. Before Li Ming finished speaking, Waldrow's blade-like tentacle pierced Li Ming's flesh from the back. Li Ming's expression changed, his eyes widened a little, and his eyeballs moved to the side to look at Waldrow. Under his trembling lips, he whispered, "What do you mean?" Waldro's mouth corners showed a sinister smile and said, Li Ming, how long do you want to continue hiding? Li Ming's eyes and facial muscles trembled slightly, as if he was in great pain, but he said in a calm tone, how did you know? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.